I'm not in support of reducing the athletics at all, so that's my position on that, because I don't think I see a huge value in our freshman athletics. They are the feeder to the other teams, and I don't think that there's enough opportunities available to freshmen on JV and varsity teams. It already exists that they will take a freshman if that person's a top-notch athlete, so that opportunity is already there, and it just doesn't happen that much. The freshman sports is a very critical sport, and I'm not in favor of cutting any sports whatsoever.
I also remember how important it was for the 8th graders coming in to have the sport.
It really connected them quickly.
Yeah, it was a nice way to connect to the school.
Well, I think the community was pretty clear a couple of years ago. We looked at freshman sports, and you may remember it was the most well-attended superintendent's
meeting you had, yes, it was.
an event which I know was high on everybody's list of things to attend. But that year, the consistent message from the community was, rather than cut, to Lori's point, I think, rather than cut sports, we'd rather pay the fee. We're already paying it on the rational, and some of you have said it. Many of us are paying it rec programs up to through 8th grade. So it's not a new development. But I think that was a very clear message. And I suspect what you would hear from the community about if you were wrestling with whether to have fees or not have fees, to your suggestion. I think that is the threshold question.
Right.
For us this evening, in order to move this discussion along, it does make sense to carve out the vote on whether or not we can agree to participation fees. Let's all agree collectively up front. We passed a good budget. We passed a thoughtful budget. We passed a budget that did not include participation fees. We're not here because we want to be here. We're here because we have to be here. And in order to come up with the $750,000, we've got a number of alternatives, one of which is no participation fees, and one of which includes participation fees. If we go without participation fees, we've got an alternative in front of us that's pretty ugly. Based on that, and based on the fact that we all probably collectively agree we don't like participation fees, can we move forward and at least accept that we have to have them and agree to that, and then move forth from there? Does that make sense?
Well, we'll have to have a vote to see.
Should we all just comment first and then vote? Because I don't know where my fellow board members are necessarily on that topic. So
we can do that if you'd like. Sure. You want to start?
I think, as most people, philosophically, absolutely 1,000% opposed to participation fees. I think in a public school system, it's just part of the education. But reality hits me hard, and if it means cutting things, I would rather pay than have very valuable programs cut. So if my hands are tied, then I would support moving forward with a participation fee, although I would want it to be not exclusive to just athletics. I would want it to be more inclusive of anything that's beyond the academic classroom would be potentially eligible. And that would be my position, I guess.
Thank you. Karen?
I'm opposed to the participation fees. I think that it really opens the door to a privatization of public education. And I ask, what's next? We're going to charge to ride the bus. But I think, most importantly, if we impose participation fees, what we have done is we've let the Board of Finance make policy for the Board of Education, and the balance of power between the Board of Education and the Board of Finance is going to swing in favor of the Board of Finance for the foreseeable future.
I see participation fees as being divisive in the student level, at the parent level, at the community level. We've heard tonight an individual that came up and spoke already saying that the fees for hockey are too high. I think that if more parents had been aware that this was happening, as we've said, there would be a very large group of individuals here tonight. I think we're going to turn our coaches into tax collectors. I think the parents, as has been reported in the study, there'll be an argument as to, well, I want to pay less a fee because my son or daughter isn't playing. I don't see that as being beneficial for the community or the academic environment, and I will oppose participation fees.
Thank you. Laura?
It's really difficult when you're weighing, like, do we do participation fees, or we're talking about a science teacher or a reading specialist. But again, it comes down to we have to make drastic cuts. I think we should make the drastic cuts, but when it comes for participation fees, I think it's a slippery slope. I agree with almost everything Karen said. And then what's next? If we do co-curriculars, then, and we're only talking about academic classes, well, then there goes music and art and technology education. And, are we going to start, charging for science if you want to participate in science lab? And I think that it's a public school, and we need to provide opportunities and really consider that. And so I am against participation fees.
Chris?
I think Tim's initial point is very well taken, that the driving factor going into these cuts was to stay away from the classroom. We haven't even gotten into some of the academic area cuts that the administration has painstakingly, I'm sure, proposed. The reading teacher, et cetera, which I have a lot of concerns about those. So, and that's with them very, very begrudgingly coming up with $250,000 in participation fees. So that said, I think we're not going to have a choice but to go this route. Nobody likes it. We did the DIRG study last fall. It's definitely a trend in Connecticut. It's a trend in our DIRG. The Board of Finance pulled $400,000 out of the air. I don't know where they came. The next closest district in our DIRG is Ridgefield, which collects $326,000, and $41,000 of those are gate receipts. And now suddenly we're supposed to come up with $400,000 to ask our parents for $400,000. We can't do that, but we have to do something. My concern is that we make it as equitable as possible, and we're throwing around, well, we can't do this, we can't do that, but we have to find a way to be fair about it. We have to find a way to make sure that no child is denied an opportunity to be on sport because his parents can't afford it, or because, to Laura's point, they have to make choices. Well, you can't be in the band and on the soccer team. I mean, we're better than that. But having said that, it's an awful problem we have, and academics have to come first. So if we have to ask parents to pay a little bit more for participation fees, I think we have to do that.
Thank you. I'm sure I'm going to get quoted on this, but I think the Board of Finance's choice of $400,000 was ludicrous and arbitrary. I don't believe they actually looked at our DIRG participation fee study. I don't think they sought any public input on that number, and I don't think they took enough time to look at our budget to understand how thin and thoughtfully put together it already was. I also believe that any cuts that we make to our school budget are cuts that are too deep at this point. Mm-hmm. Yet we still are faced with $750,000 that we have to agree to tonight. With that, I am against participation fees for the same reasons that all of you are, but I am in favor of implementing a $400,000 participation fee program. And I believe that we ought to measure the success of that program over the next year. We ought to look at participation levels last year compared to next year and report back on that to the town. I agree that a flat fee structure is not necessarily fair, but rather we should be looking at the fee relative to the cost of the program and the number of people participating in it. I have a very difficult time thinking of a runner who participates in cross-country, participates in indoor track, and participates in spring track, and is asked to pay $600 and yet gets a tank top. That to me does not sit well. We have to vote on it, and the reality is if we do not approve participation fees, we are going to cut into the classroom, and that sickens me. So I ask each of you to consider voting for the classroom and do so with stringent disagreement with how we're put in this position. But I don't see how we can move forward without doing so. And Karen, I get your point about the Board of Finance putting their fingers in our business, and I think we need to make it very clear to the town that what they've done is completely inappropriate, and we do not feel that they have done the town or any citizen in it any justice. What they've done is egregious. With that, I'd like a motion to approve participation fees.
So moved.
I'll second it. All in favor? All opposed? We have a problem because I envision that we're not going to get to an agreement on how we hit our budget tonight. And based on town bylaws, if we can't come to an agreement tonight, we pull in the first selectman to help us break this. So, do we want to discuss this further? Do we want to go to that level?
Perhaps it would be better to, at this point, having kind of seen where people are, discuss the other reduction issues and other possibilities, because perhaps there's some things out there that are not part of these recommendations. I think all of us have kind of talked
And one
about
other
I'm okay
thing-
with that.
that maybe to go there and then
Okay.
revisit this
I'm okay with that.
issue.
But did
Right.
did we want to ask the administration to review athletics in general, or is that now off the table?
I'm not opposed to them providing information. I think the more information, the better for anything.
Do we need a motion to request the administration to do that?
The challenge that I have in doing that is we're out of time.
You know, the one other thing I want to add, and again, this is going back to the Board of Finance. The way it was phrased at that meeting was that this is something we can do, and we've been hiding, you know, it's always been, they've always known they had this over us, that they could always get the Board of Ed. So long as we didn't do participation fees, they knew that they could cut our budget, because we could always resort to that. So as long as we don't do that, they'll always know, well, we can keep cutting until we sort of drive them to do it. The way that it was phrased at the meeting last week, it was unanimous, and it was just a given.
Yeah.
Maybe the Board of Finance will change.
I'm sorry?
Never mind.
Yeah,
Say the numbers may change.
Chris makes a good
Well,
point, though.
yeah, but
You know, if we're able to do what they're asking us to do without participation fees, they're always going to think that we can cut deeper.
because, oh, they didn't resort to it this year, so we'll get it next year.
But then what's the stopping from, so we do it this year and saying, okay, look, great, we raised $250,000
Double
from
it.
high school
Double it.
students.
Mhm.
Let's, you know.
Well, then we'll have the pushback.
Well, that's where I think the actual participation levels
Right,
speak back to the town on that.
which is Bruce's
And Dr.
point.
Richards brought up an interesting point. If we implement a $400,000 participation fee program based on a well-thought-out, balanced program that tries to evenly and fairly distribute the costs, and half the kids don't show up, to your point, then we miss our revenue target.
Mhm.
We're off our budget at the end of the year. We have no choice but to take it out of the excess cost grant. And we have clear, measurable data to deliver back to the town that that was an insane number.
I think it may take more than a year. I think for the first year, you know, for 1 year, maybe parents were like, okay, you know, I think it would need to be. I don't know if there'll be enough. If there is, you know, I don't know.
That's a fair point. Don't know.
Yeah, and in the meantime, like you said, but who suffers in the meantime,
Well, it also
the
seems-
2-3 years where you're doing this, there are kids who are not participating, so you've already lost some kids.
And we're talking about mental health, and we're
Right.
talking about,
Right.
we can be doing a lot to help our students learn and grow to love school through the grade school, but I think we all around this table know that teenagers are a different beast. And they have different, and that's why high school is structured differently than middle grade
Right.
school.
Yeah.
Right.
And they have different needs and different requirements for their education. And,
I spoke to two varsity coaches, past and present, about the concept of participation fees, and also about the concept of would it make sense if we have to do this to try to pass some of this overall cost on to the boosters. And their take was surprising to me, which was, we're expecting participation fees to come, and that's fine. And if there is a child that can't afford it or has difficulty, that's an appropriate opportunity to work with a booster program to cover that cost. They did not see or feel some of the pain that we're expressing here. I was very surprised at that.
Well, that does run counter to the meeting we had last year, I believe, or maybe it was the year before, where we had the boosters and the athletic director up in front of us, and he asked that exact question.
Right. And mind you,
And
it was
their-
two individuals, so.
Yeah, and their response was that it would definitely damage their ability to fund their operations by having the parents pay into that and then pay the
It would hurt
participation fee.
the booster clubs.
Mhm.
Okay, well, if, in order to try to move this along, let's have a conversation about other places that we might recommend to the district look at if participation fees aren't on the table. And
Well, let me just raise one, because I'm sure Ken's already thought about it, but the actuaries and the funding formula for OPEB, has that been included in the $589,000 number?
That's
for
the number
OPEB?
the actuary provides us. And it's based on, much like the pension obligation, it's based on the June 30th, 2012 balance and liability.
Okay, and does that change is that based on the changes to the formula that we agreed to last year?
I believe it, yeah.
I think this is going to be a long night, so if my family's watching, go ahead and eat dinner.
Actually, I'm going to wait for you.
Karen's neighbor, did you go over and turn her dinner off? With that, let's go around the table and see if there's any other budget cut places we might suggest the district consider. Let's start on the right this time.
I'm still, again, staying away from the classrooms. I would like to look into not replacing the 2 administrative positions that are currently open.
That would be the vice principal at the high school and
the vice principal of high school and the assistant superintendent
the assistant
position.
superintendent.
Again, not eliminate the position, freeze them. I'm wondering if there are any efficiencies to be found. You mentioned that you know of 5 teachers so far who are retiring. Do we have any support staff who have indicated that they won't be returning, they'll be leaving?
There have been a couple, but the only place you really see a substantial savings is with teachers, because there's such a large spread between entry-level salary and retirement salary. You don't have that with any of the other
Even when
groups.
you factor in benefits and things?
No.
But does that,
The benefits are the same for everybody, basically.
does that open up the possibility, though, of merging positions?
Yeah.
Combining functions?
I suppose it would in some cases. We have to look at them individually. Don't forget, in our initial budget proposal, we are eliminating 1 clerical position at Miller Driscoll that is vacant.
I was also wondering, I hate to even say this, but the anonymous gift that we got for pre-K, is there any way that can be used to offset some of the pre-K technology costs? Or is that the nature of the gift? That it's
No, the
above
gift
and
had to
beyond?
be on top of what we're already obligated to do.
I feel awful saying somebody's birthday present.
If I may,
Please.
in identifying opportunities for further reduction, it's apparent to me that the board is asking for feedback. That happened with the OPEB, further retirements, and the anonymous gifts. Are you inviting feedback on the administrator?
Yeah, sure.
I think that the issue around reduction reduction may not be the right word, because I heard you say hiring freeze in the two vacant positions,
Yeah.
which is the assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction and the assistant principalship at the high school. I think that it's interesting, from my perspective, that in all of the deliberations up until this point, there's been no conversation about reductions to our administrative team staffing. Certainly, I think the board would be quite mindful of the impact of school and district operations if both of these positions were left vacant. Our administrators are, as you know, in my view, working at full capacity across the district to focus on instructional leadership, working on student scheduling, supervision, and disciplinary matters, the all-important conversations around supervision and evaluation. And in fact, we're looking, as Jane Anderson has talked about, a new evaluation plan that's going to put tremendous obligation on our administrators to not only supervise our non-tenured teachers, but all of our tenured teachers under the plan, requiring observations of all those teachers. The special education responsibilities that take place, the idea that at the high school you would have 2 assistant principals overseeing our special education caseload and 504 caseloads, I think would be problematic. The work that we do in overseeing and supervising club and activity programs, on parent and community relations, on crisis management. As I'm sure the board recognizes, there are times at each of our buildings where the entire administrative team can go offline for multiple days dealing with one student issue. The idea of the work that we do to manage our facilities, to oversee emergency operations, to oversee strategic planning. And in terms of the work of this office, the extent to which this position was left vacant in our district's history for a period of years. And I think there has been somewhat unanimous deliberation around that and conclusions around that, that it created a structure where we lost systemic and strategic planning K-12 across the district. Our curriculum and instruction evolved in a way where buildings were operating independent of each other. The work of the support of the educational philosophy, goals, and objectives of our program. Again, I'll allude to the coordination and articulation of the K-12 curriculum program. The evaluation of new programs that are being implemented, the Math and Focus program, the K-5 Literacy Initiative, the STEM Initiative, the full-day kindergarten program. Absent this position, to have that fall entirely on our building principals, I think is something the board needs to think about. Supporting technology integration and assessment, implementing the strategic plan, the efforts to support the superintendent as his designee in many of the deliberations that impact our school district. I think you would find it not surprising that I would stand and try to elicit the board's support not to consider that option around a reduction in administrators here across our team. If indeed we were asked to consider a reduction in our ranks, I think the board would appreciate the opportunity for us to deliberate as a leadership team about where best to accomplish that outcome. I do think the board needs to be reflective about a determination that a prioritized reduction in our administrative team would come from the assistant superintendency and from the assistant principalship at the high school. if we were put into a position where we had to strategically reduce the administrators in our district, we would have to deliberate as a team of how best to accomplish that. So just giving you feedback about this proposal or the possibility of a reduction in that area. And again, I'm sure the board isn't surprised that we would try to educate the board about how a reduction in our administrator ranks would be, I think, a difficult cut to absorb.
I think
in our
one of the,
program.
I'm sorry, Tim. I
I'm
think
sorry.
one of the issues, Chris, about the freeze part of your thought was what that does is that in effect puts an automatic spike in next year's budget. If you pull
Yeah, I
that
saw
out,
that.
I mean, it's like the issue where we went round and
Right.
round, and we were able to avoid it with the the capital and non-recurring. But it creates a significant
Yeah.
spike that makes you wonder whether you'd ever be able to capture that if you found out that it was not in some. And I think it would be. We've talked a lot about this internally and about what the implications would be. I don't think you'd be in a position to get that back if you found out it was a disaster. I think that the exposure we would have, in addition to just some of the things that would not get done, I think there are other exposure issues that we have concerns about. For example, and we've talked a great deal about, and Bruce put it in his presentation, just the amount of administrative time, and that's falling a lot on the assistant principal level on PPTs. When you're looking at 1,661, which is, it's not a trend that's going in the opposite direction. So I think there's exposure there for us, and all that does is that would pull principals away even more than they already are now, and they carry a certain amount of that load. And it's a big responsibility. I mean, there are days at a time when we'll say we want to get a meeting together, and the principals look at us and say, "I'm sorry, I'm booked for 3 or 4 days with PPTs." So what we would do is we'd be expanding that time, and I think that's a concern for us.
Any other?
Well, to Chris's...
Let's keep going around if we can. Any other thoughts and areas?
No, not right now.
Laura?
Can you come back to me? Sorry, I was distracted. I was just
Okay.
getting my children first.
Okay.
Your priorities are good.
Always a mom. Always a mom first.
Well, we've talked about it, but in terms of busing, can you just comment on whether we can get by with fewer buses than we have today? Does that mean that we would be extending the time that individuals are on the bus, and would we be able to maintain that? Your thoughts?
Yeah, we most certainly, if we were to reduce buses, we would most certainly increase time the students would be on buses. And it would, given our current bell schedule, there is certainty that children would not be arriving to school on time.
Has Mary run a simulation?
We ran a simulation in 2011 when we were going out for an RFP for a transportation contract. It was performed by the software company that we currently use, and they came back with no recommendations whatsoever for an improvement in our transportation routing.
Okay, but now we're looking at the 13-14 school year. We have dropped 138 students since October 1st of 08. That seems to me that it's possibly you may have the critical mass now to drop a bus. And you know who's coming in from kindergarten, you know who's graduating, so I would think that they would be able to do that simulation to tell us definitively if we still need the same number of buses next year.
Based on the coverage of the town that we have to cover, even with a small reduction in enrollment, I can't see that there would be any change. Based on the bell schedules that we have and the limited time that we have to achieve. Also, our buses are really, the number of buses that we have is based upon the enrollment at Middlebrook High School levels, grades 6 through 12, which is our greatest number of students on the bus at any one time during the day. And we currently, I have the figures as far as how we assign the load to each bus. We currently have a great number of buses where we have assigned between 80 and 90 students per bus. Even if we base it on 80% ridership because of that age with students driving, we're still assigning more students to buses than we actually have room to seat on those buses. So if we were to cut the number of buses, we would have a dramatic impact on available seating on our buses.
So we're already doing that today? We're over subscribing just like the airlines do?
Oh, absolutely.
And do we have crowding issues now?
At different times of the year, yes, we do.
So
On certain routes. And what we did in our newest contract is we received 6 buses that are currently routed that have a greater seating capacity than the majority of our buses. We have 83 passenger and 73 passenger buses. The 83 passenger buses are assigned to those Middlebrook High School routes that have a high number of assigned students to them. They range anywhere from 80 to 89 students on those buses. And as you know, we've had the discussions before about how many students we can realistically seat in a school bus seat, even though it's 39 inches wide and we have 3 left shoulder belts in most of the seats except for one row. We know at Middlebrook High School age we're not putting 3 students in a seat. So our actual seating capacity in those buses is much lower.
So in your professional opinion, there's no way we could cut buses?
That is correct.
And if we cut them, what would happen? Even though we can't, if we did, what would happen?
We have overcrowded buses that possibly might not be able to legally perform their, the drivers would have to refuse to drive them. If we had students that could not fit into the seats without being out into the aisles, our bell schedules might have to be changed. And I think it's important for you to understand the reason that Wilton has a much greater difficulty in this than other districts is because of our bell times at the high school and Middlebrook level. As far as I know, we're the only district in the state that has the high school and middle school in the middle section of times. We're restricted because they go in second. When the high school used to go first, I think our bell time to start classes was at 7:15, 7:20, as I recall well. And when we changed it, and our first-tier school now starts school at 7:40, we immediately got a 25-minute difference in our starting bell time for our district. We also had to not pick up students before 7 o'clock in the morning because the parents at the Cider Mill School level did not want us picking up this young and aged student at 6:45 in the morning. High school students throughout their surrounding districts, their buses start picking up students at 6:35, 6:40 a.m. We don't start till 7 o'clock picking up a Cider Mill student. Greatly impacts what we can do with our buses. The comment actually from the software routing company was, you do a very good job.
So we'd have to look
They had no
at...
recommendation for cutting at the time, and basically nothing has changed since they did that simulation for us.
So in order to cut buses, we'd have to change our bell schedule and have the high schoolers start earlier.
And possibly add some buses just to service only Middlebrook High School. It would be a complicated change. It would take some, besides changing the bell schedule and times to go to school. It would be extremely difficult to do. Not impossible.
Do most districts combine middle school with our high school bus runs? Is that a
Not
common?
all. I don't know what the percentage would be as far as most of, not most. But we also have the time constraints there because we're picking up both of those campuses on the same buses within a certain amount of time.
Sure.
And basically, we do that in a 20-minute period in the afternoon and are able to get all the high school and middle school students on a bus in 2 locations dealing with traffic and get them home, and then try to get to Miller Driscoll at a reasonable time.
How much money do we save if we cut one bus?
How much?
Yes.
60. Approximately $68,152.
Is there any appetite on the board to change all of the bell schedules in the district to save $62,000?
What was the question?
Is there any appetite on the board to entertain changing all of the bell schedules to save $62,000?
You don't know what this town went through to...
Oh, yes.
Change.
We don't want to do that again.
To change things around and put the middle school second.
The number of buses we had to add when we changed the high school bell schedule to be the middle tier was 2.
Okay.
We added 2 buses to accommodate that bus schedule change.
And in order to remove those 2 buses, we'd have to move the high school back to the beginning of the day?
And change our student pickup time to somewhere between 6:30 and 6:45.
Okay, so that's the question. Is there any appetite on the board to look at doing that? No? No? No, no?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions, Karen? Gilly, do you have any more?
Just thinking, but
Okay.
please go ahead.
Let's extend the transportation conversation and talk about athletic transportation. Is there a way to skinny down the number of buses we use for that by perhaps making sure that the freshman teams travel with either the JV or the varsity team, or limiting the number of, as somebody mentioned, the number of away games that the band goes to, those considerations? They're probably small numbers, but
Yeah.
Mary Lynn.
We had numerous discussions with the athletic department, and we believe that we've achieved a very good system this year as far as transporting our teams. The athletic secretary keeps a very good count of how many participants there are on average with each team. We utilize what we call Type 2 bus, which is the shorter bus, for the teams that we can do that with, whether it's a tennis team in the spring season. In the winter, the wrestling team is much smaller, so we're able to use those buses to be able to manage it. We use the 83-passenger buses and sometimes combine the JV and the varsity teams at the same time. We also acquired buses that have undercarriage storage in them, so that it used to be when a team got on that had lots of equipment, some of the seats and many of the seats were taken up with their equipment. We now have 2 spare buses that aren't used on our regular routes every day that are available for athletics that have extensive undercarriage storage, so that we can fit more children on a bus, on a team. The band utilizes it also, but it comes into play with not so much the football teams, because that's a big, large number of students on that team. But some of the smaller teams, JV and varsity, we regularly combine them together. And I think the athletic department has done a very good job coordinating that with the bus contract.
And the teams that choose to use coach buses, that's their own
Hockey team,
expense?
This past season, the ice hockey team, both boys and girls, the athletic department chose not to use our bus contractor, and they contracted out to a coach bus company, which they felt was a better answer perhaps than 2 buses. I'm not sure what the reason was, because I don't know the size of the teams, but I do know that they do have extensive bulky equipment that they carry.
And the ski team, are they still using coach
And
buses?
as far as I know, I don't have an exact figure on it, but I believe the cost of transporting the ice hockey teams this past season was over $10,000.
And that's an increase then from what previously when they used our school buses?
It's really it's
About the
comparing
same?
when you can use 2 school buses.
Okay.
And they say that they can combine use 1 coach bus and that. So, but I really didn't. That was their decision, and we didn't enter into the discussion.
But also, now the men's and women's ice hockey teams both play on different rinks. They practice on different rinks? Is that... Mhm. I don't know who can
I'm
answer
sorry,
that.
what's the question?
Girls and boys hockey, they play at different rinks?
Yes, sir. The girls go to Sono and the boys go to...
Boys and girls.
Mhm.
I'm sorry.
Thank
Can you answer the question, Bob?
Yes, they do play in 2 different ways.
Mhm.
Thank you. Gil, did you have any other, actually, I'm sorry, Karen, did you have any other cut questions?
I guess I want to ask about the Miller Driscoll Science Aid. Why that position is still in the budget.
Do we have somebody to comment on that?
To be clear, the Miller Driscoll Science Aid, are you referring to the resource teacher?
No, we do have a science aide.
There's an aide down there.
We do have a science aide. We have 2 part-time people. One works part-time special ed, and then the other one is part-time. And they're the ones that gather all the hands-on materials that we have for the student classes. They help organize the parents that participate in working with them, help with the science fair, all those kinds of things.
Okay, I ask only because what I've heard is that there aren't that many parents coming in to help with science.
We still, for instance, we have the Outdoor Learning Center activity, and that's coming up the week after the holiday, and we have probably 4 parents every hour of the day for that type of thing. So we have different kinds of activities. There aren't as many throughout the day, but the less parents that you have, the more you have to have somebody else organize those materials. So the more we don't have those parents, the more somebody else has to organize, get those out. Everything is organizing the chicks for the kindergarten, getting them from the farm, getting them into the classroom, getting them out of the classroom when they're too big and they're flying all around, getting the butterflies, organizing them. It is a different piece of organization when you're in an elementary school where classroom teachers go from one class to the next class. They're not science teachers. They're generalists. They go from class to class. It's a half-an-hour class, maybe a day. And those individuals are the people that help organize those. The science resource teacher is the one that does the curriculum organization.
Lori?
I guess some general comments. I'm not happy with the cuts that are on, obviously not happy with any of the cuts. Listening to myself as I started to speak. All of these, the reading teachers, the science IL, the library media, the grade 1 teacher, et cetera, et cetera. But I hear what Tim's saying too regarding the administrative cuts and whatever. And it's kind of comparing, what would be the lesser of 2 evils if we had to make personnel type cuts. And I guess given that if it was between all of these staff people that I see listed here, I would support one administrative cut. And I recognize and understand what Tim is saying, rather than us as a board saying it's got to be, don't, backfill this position. I respect that and say, well, then if our direction is to cut one admin position, then your team can come back to us and say this is where the cut happens, and I understand that. The other thing that I would be looking at, again to Tim's point, is backfilling him because he's irreplaceable. Aren't you feeling guilty now that this is even on the table? Anyway.
It must feel odd to defend a job you're leaving.
I wonder, and maybe Ken can help us with this, how much savings there might be if we keep the position but take away the assistant superintendent title of that position so that we still get a person who can manage all that curriculum development things, the professional development, the Common Core, state standards, and all of that, but without the title. I know we're going now, obviously, if you have somebody who is capable and experienced enough to have an assistant superintendent title, they obviously are a higher caliber individual overall. But again, it's that choosing the lesser of two evils, lose the position altogether, or can we just reduce the status of the position and still fulfill a critical service to the district? So those are my ideas.
I don't think you're going to get, Jamie, I want to speak to it. I think you're not going to get the level of savings by reducing it. You're still, you have to look at what you want to attract.
Mm-hmm.
And if you make it a director, you aren't going to attract, as you said, that someone, I think, with the extensive skill set that you need in the job. I think if you look at what the salary differential would be, I don't think you can cut it too much, or you're not going to get people who even apply for it, because it's a lateral kind of a move. So it's not. I mean, we've got a huge, as I think Bruce said very eloquently, we've got a big gap here.
Mm-hmm.
And Tim, I think, outlined the fact that, and as you said, Lori, I think if you have no revenue generating,
right.
You're looking at $750,000 cuts that are very painful. And I think that, arguably could you make a bunch of small cuts, but I don't see how you get to a point to stave off
right.
the kind of things that you had real concerns about.
Right.
Just a point of, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we're still discussing the administrator piece. I just had a supplemental comment about the process,
Mm-hmm.
if I may.
Sure.
I just wanted to share with the board that as part of our process last week, we asked each of the principals to actually come up with a series of possible reductions that hadn't been considered earlier in our deliberations, to try to be sure that we have turned over every stone around where they felt at the building level they could make reductions. Many of those items that hadn't been discussed prior are now part of the recommended reductions that would occur if we were not to have participation fees. In other words, the zero revenue model. So I wanted to reassure, maybe not the right word, but indicate to the board that the recommended reductions that are part of the what we're describing as alternative one, which is the alternative that doesn't generate any revenue, are the result of extensive conversations and thoughtful deliberations around possible reduction areas, including to a large extent the ideas that you've shared with us this evening that go beyond what we have discussed in our recommendation.
Back on the administrator piece, Tim.
Right.
Is there a difference between what's it called, the 093, that an assistant superintendent would have and be able to evaluate teachers? Would a director have to have that same designation, whatever it's
So
called?
if the assistant superintendent would have the 093, a director or anyone under the level of superintendent could have an 092. You need an 092, which is the administration supervision certification to be able to evaluate certified staff.
Okay. That was my question. Thank you.
What's the cost difference in hiring an 092 versus an 093?
I hesitate. There is not.
And I know that's a difficult question. I apologize.
No, that's okay. The reason I hesitate is for a few reasons. One, I think that if you are looking to attract a high-quality candidate, to get someone to come to a high-performing district in a leadership role that has the scope and the oversight that the assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction has here in that district, it needs to be an attractive position. Someone who is ascending and looking to continue in their professional growth. To have a director of curriculum and instruction puts great limitations on the type of candidate you would get. Those are considered really lateral moves, and you would really want someone who is looking to make a jump to be able to have for the responsibilities of this job.
But we may not be able to afford to do that. I mean, we may like to do that, but we may not be able to afford it. We've got a $750,000 hole here. We're trying to figure out how to close.
And I certainly understand that, and I respect that. However, I think it is in the best interest of the district to maintain an assistant superintendent position. I think you would do yourselves a great disservice to put that position at a director of curriculum and instruction. Well, a lot of the work of that office is in curriculum and instruction. Because of the virtue of the administrative structure of the district, because it is a smaller district, it falls into lots of other areas that are above and beyond curriculum and instruction. You need someone who has the ability, who has the knowledge, who has the experience in other fields to be able to help continue to drive the mission and the vision of the district forward.
So to Jane's point, if I may, in terms of this position, you really have to look at it from multiple perspectives. We've talked about recruitment. We've talked about the scope and responsibility of the position. I'm going to depersonalize this by just suggesting to the board, look at the work that comes out of my office that arguably maybe goes beyond the responsibility of overseeing curriculum and instruction. This office plays a significant role in public relations in terms of, as I sit in front of you right now, providing the point on budget deliberations and trying to provide oversight of that work in a way that gives the systemic overview of the entire program. The conversations right now that I'm having with you go way beyond the scope of curriculum and instruction matters.
And Ken's thankful you're here.
I would talk about the strategic plan work. That goes well beyond the responsibility of overseeing the implementation of curriculum instruction. In fact, it's one strand in the program, yet this office does that work. I would speak to the responsibilities that the superintendent of schools has in overseeing this high-performing school district. With all due respect to the as designated by the superintendent, this office engages a range of tasks on a daily basis that supports the role of superintendent that go well beyond the work of curriculum instruction. One of which, quite frankly, is to be in charge when the superintendent's out of the district. In terms of having the deputy, most districts that I can think of have the deputy superintendent role, where you do fulfill those responsibilities as well. So it really speaks not only to recruitment and those issues, but about the range and scope and the responsibility of the position. And like I would argue with any reduction at the building level or at the other district level offices, you would have to think very carefully about, we use the mantra, how's the work going to get done? How will the work get done? Your administrators in this district, which in my view, I think the data would support the student ratio of administrators to students in Wilton Public Schools. Your administrators are at 100% capacity in terms of the work they're doing across this district. So you'd have to ask the question, how's the work going to get done? What's going to go to the wayside? So if you're going to modify the responsibilities of this position as a cost savings measure, you have to really think about what that impact would look like, and we probably would be responsible to define that better for you than the general commentary I'm providing for you tonight.
Okay, I want to try to move this forward and at least make the size of the elephant we're eating smaller. We have line items on this spreadsheet that you've given us. Is there any consensus in agreeing to the cuts down through lines 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? Do we want to see if we can at least...
Certainly down to 8. I think we've got some agreement.
I'm okay with down to 8.
Including 8?
Including 8.
Including 8.
Although I'm not happy about it, but I'm not happy about it.
Yeah. Okay. If we can agree to cuts down to 8, that's $419,780. It includes Staff replacement savings of $66,279. Heating oil savings of $33,800. Diesel fuel savings $19,000. Furniture $49,576. High school clubs and activities $9,600. Technology projects at $100,000. Textbooks at $61,525. And curriculum and professional development at $80,000. Chris and Laura?
Yeah, I was very concerned about the textbooks, but...
When you explained it.
Yeah, the way you've explained it, I mean, it's what are we going to do? We got to cut $750,000 of budget. You found a way to sort of get it done.
Can I have a motion to approve lines 1 through 8?
So moved.
1 through 7.
1 through 8.
1 through 8.
What's the curriculum?
Curriculum.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
We have a motion, second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay.
Some progress.
419,780.
1970.
I'm going home.
Chris, can I ask some questions about...
Yeah, please.
Where does that come to?
Lines 15 down.
We have 330,220 to go.
Okay. With lines 15 down, when if you cut the half position in line 15, what does that leave you with? If you cut the half position in 16, what does that leave you with? I have that question about all of the positions there.
So 15 through 19?
15 through 19, and then 22, 23. What do you, no, and then 22.
In other words, how many 10-month secretaries do you have left if you cut the .5? Is that what you're asking?
If you cut a 10-month secretary by .5, do you have a .5 10-month secretary left?
Mm-hmm.
If you cut the .5 science IL at Cider Mill, is there any science
Yes.
IL position left?
.5 is left, and
.5
same with the Unified Arts IL.
Okay.
.5 left.
And then if you cut a half a media specialist from the high school in Miller Driscoll, how many media specialists do you have left?
1.5 in each.
1.5 each. And then with the computer lab aid at the high school?
0.5.
0.5 is left. Okay, thank you.
What do we want to do about the athletic budget as we continue to consider our academics?
I'd like to go back, and I would like to ask the administration to come back to us and tell us how they would, if they had to cut, per your suggestion, a certain amount, how would they do it? With the across-the-board cut, and taking into consideration the across-the-board cut, the availability of programs elsewhere, that all of the considerations that you mentioned.
So you want to
just see what that would look
You want
like.
to give them a dollar amount to work towards?
Well, we're currently...
When you're working towards the 250,000.
You're at 35,383
to
now
replace
on
the-
line 21.
I'm sorry, what?
In the zero revenue, in line 21,
Right.
that's our
Gotcha.
estimation right now,
Mm-hmm.
where we could reduce athletics, clubs and activities. And I know the specificity of athletics is the question at hand.
Right.
If we cut,
It's important to note, if I may, that we cut $25,000 from the athletic program in round, from the superintendent's recommended to the Board of Education recommended. So we've already reduced the athletic budget by $25,000. So then to get to the next level while maintaining programs is quite difficult.
if we cut lines 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 22, that's $120,762. Is there any support in doing that?
I mean, leaving the cuts in or taking them out?
Making those cuts
Making the cuts, okay.
to save another $120,762.
How much was that again, Rich?
It's lines 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 22. I came up with $120,762. I'm going to double check my math. Can I assume you're doing the same thing?
You know, the high schoolers would have this figured out.
Their thumbs are fast. Their thumbs are smaller and faster.
127.62.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there an appetite to make those cuts?
And it is not 23. We would leave the first grade teacher.
We would leave the first grade teacher,
Yes.
And so far, we've left the...
And we've left the reading teacher.
and we've
too.
left the reading
Mhm.
teacher.
And I'm sorry, cutting the science IL at Cider Mill, what does that leave us with?
We still have the still a .5 science IL, and we still have a science resource teacher at Cider Mill.
1.0.
So this .5, like these cuts here, these are people who are actually in the position right now.
Correct.
Okay. So either part of their time gets reduced or they're gone.
Or they shifted to other schools.
Or they're
Right.
shifted to, what was that?
Somewhere else in the school system.
Depending on the
Well,
Depending on-
vacancies in the
Right.
district,
Mhm.
people
Gotcha.
would be
Okay.
reassigned. We don't,
But these aren't ones that were put into the budget that you're now pulling out. These are,
They pre-existing.
they are actually
positions.
existing positions. Okay.
Right.
Gotcha.
Currently staffed.
Right, currently staffed. Okay.
Is there support to make that 120,762 in cuts?
Yes, from my side.
Do we have a motion?
I so move.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Brings us to 523.
540, 542.
Well, the ones up above is what, 402,
No, 419, 780
419, 780.
plus 120, 762 equals 540, 542.
540. Okay.
We're down to 208.
Can we talk more about the technology budget?
209, 458 is what we have. Is that right?
Yeah.
209, yeah. 2095.
It's a big budget.
Yeah, I'd be interested in knowing by project which ones would be cut.
Yeah, I have that. What's
I-
included in that?
So far, we have proposed reducing smart boards in Project 2 and Project 7,
Well, that's because it's
cutting Project 9, 10, and 14.
It's this list.
Hold on, I have your list.
She does have it. Okay. Oh, I do
Sorry,
see that.
540,
I thought there was a
545.
question, sorry.
Yes, it is a good. Go ahead, yeah. No, go ahead.
Okay, so reducing Project 2 by 19,133, reducing Project 7 by $3,427, eliminating Project 9, 10, and 14, reducing Project 17 by $15,450, reducing Project 19 by $3,469, eliminating Project 20, reducing Project 21 by $3,826, eliminating Project 22, reducing Project 23 by $4,806, Project 28 by $4,291, Project 29, remove the iPad cart for a savings of $2,600, reducing Project 30 by $1,948, reducing Project 32 by $2,403. There was part of the budget also should be noted was a cut from the professional development, the training, and there were additional incremental cuts in addition to that. So the total impact on the technology budget, including the professional development cuts, is $110,000 proposed, if you agree.
So you're down to about 998?
It cuts us down to, about 1,989,117, which is about a minus 1% over last year.
Again, I think it should be pointed out the bulk of your budget is your staff costs.
Yes.
Right.
Just the way our budget's overall.
Is there any appetite or support to approve line item 21, which is a cut to the athletic budget of $35,000?
I would think that would be within, if we decided to charge the administration to come back and do an evaluation of the athletic program for a specific amount, that would be included in that analysis.
Well,
Or is that different?
if I may, to do the math at this point, our math suggests that there's $209,458 left. I would ask the board to amend line 7 to include the additional $13,000 that you see in the other scenarios. It's our recommendation that just to be clear, when you said line 7, we're looking at the 75,160.
Actually, I was looking at your recommendation, 61,525.
We were looking at your 61.
I'm suggesting to the board that in light of what's happening apparently in front of my eyes is you're looking very closely at alternative 1
Right.
in terms of the recommendations you're making. So I would, in light of what seems to be occurring here, I would ask the board to revisit the 61525. And since a lot of these reductions are coming from alternative 1, to ask the board to consider the 75160 for textbooks.
What do we lose when we do that?
Our current thinking is we lose a $13,000 request for geometry textbooks at grade 8, although we would look for flexibility around those requests to see if we could absorb that reduction in a way that is the least impact on our program. But the current thinking is the geometry request at Middlebrook, grade 8. So that's 75,160, which would take off another $13,000 from the 209,000 plus amount.
Is there appetite to do that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just really troubled that we're making these cuts to the academics, but we're not touching the athletic costs.
We'll
Well,
get to that.
Yeah, it's coming.
All right.
I think it's.
So we're not eliminating.
So we still need 195,823.
Well-
No, I understand, but like I was
We're
telling Bruce,
we're not there.
195,823.
Yeah, but Ken, we're not there yet.
Until they're
I mean, here's-
falling apart. So I know these are really badly needed textbook replacements that we're cutting.
The flexibility that Tim is asking for, I would assume, means that you'll reevaluate all textbooks and figure out a way to replace the ones that most greatly need it.
And bear in mind that the total textbook request this year was about $430,000, and the ones that we've offered up tonight are the ones that the principals have identified as the ones, while desired, are the most expendable among all of their requests. So we still have quite a bit in there.
Does that give you any level of comfort, Chris?
Yes.
That there's still
Okay.
300 and some
But can I ask a
thousand
question?
Exactly.
For geometry, were we looking at like a new program for geometry? It wasn't just replacing
It's
old textbooks?
it's our current thinking.
Mhm.
If it were not to be modified, you're looking
Okay.
at a more Common Core-based geometry textbook. The reality is, if we were to go with our current geometry textbook, the issue that we would face with that cohort,
Mhm.
which, as I recall, is approximately 70 to 75 students, very round number, 3 sections,
Yeah.
geometry grade 8.
Yeah.
It's about 75 students. The implication of that reduction in deferring a textbook request for a year, if we weren't able to make that happen, is we'd have to work with those students in their freshman and sophomore year in high school to make sure that any Common Core gaps are addressed before they take the assessments at juniors. So you actually would have 2 years to respond to the use of a current textbook that may have some common core gaps. So that's sort of the math of that.
So this is foreseeing a change in the CAP testing? Because right now...
It's anticipation of 8th graders who will,
Right.
in their next state mandated assessment,
Mhm.
will take the next round as juniors, not as sophomores anymore,
Right, I
as
understand
juniors. I'm trying to do the math here. It must be in the, 16, 17 year. You'd have the freshman and sophomore year to plug up those gaps, and we would also look to supplement the work as eighth graders. Is it ideal? No. If we wouldn't put it on the board.
But are they putting up the gaps now, I guess? Is
We're
what I'm
putting it
asking.
forward in this scenario where we're trying to raise funding in lieu of revenue.
Mhm.
We think we can make it work.
Okay.
Let me ask you this, the 8th grade geometry is the advanced group of math.
That's correct.
So they're not using the same textbooks that freshman geometry is using? They're using a different textbook than freshman geometry?
The current thinking is that we're looking at adopting a Common Core-based
Mhm.
geometry textbook
Right.
that would be used by our 8th graders
Mhm.
and our college prep level high school age students, freshmen and sophomores,
Right.
depending on the level of...
So eventually, all 3 of those grades would
So
have the same textbook?
We are planning to purchase those textbooks at the high school level. It's still part of our budget for next year. The
Okay.
reason we're not moving away from that
Right.
is we have less time to get those kids
And
ready
it's a larger group of kids,
for
right? Yeah.
the 2014-15 school year.
You'll have to come back to us for curriculum approval changes on that stuff.
Textbook requests anyways,
Right.
coming up in June.
But those are still in the budget.
The high school
school-
level
High
is
school
still in the
geometry
budget.
ones are still in the budget.
Still in the
Yeah.
budget.
Okay.
It's just the 8th
Majority
grade,
of-
$13,000.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Everybody in favor of using alternative 1, line item 7 then?
Yes, fine.
Chris?
Yes.
We're okay with that. So that leaves 195,823 to go.
Can I just ask one question? That's not on this particular topic, but it's on equipment purchases of 85,000. What is that actually?
What do you mean?
I'm just wondering, it says equipment purchases, it's up 8%.
Non-technology?
Non-technology. Are we getting a car,
Are
a
you-
truck?
There's no trucks in the budget. I would have to look to see, Gil. I don't know off the top of my head.
I was just looking
Yeah.
at this particular line, and
You sure there's not technology in there?
Well, no, we identify it as
this is under
non-technology. on
construction.
that.
outplacements
It's specifically identified as non-technology.
Yeah.
That's contracted services outplacements.
Contract service outplacement equipment.
Right.
Was that equipment related to special ed or something?
Some of it could be
$1 million.
assistive
Could be. It's a lot of
technology.
money.
yeah.
Right.
I'd have to look to
Did we
see specifically.
just checking this in? Sorry.
That's okay. We have 195,823 to go. Are there any other questions about other places to look? That leaves in my mind, that leaves a reduction to the athletic budget of part or all of that. And Laura, one of the concerns that you expressed on participation fees is that $200 was just way too much. If we reduce the athletic budget by the recommended $35,383 and then implement a participation fee across athletics and co-curriculars for the rest, is that something that the board might be willing to entertain and pass? Laura, I'll put it up to you.
So you're talking about the 35,000 that is under alternative 1? Is that what you
Yes.
mentioned?
Yeah, line item 21.
So it leaves us 160 to raise?
Yes. that-
Approximately?
Across all activities and sports.
So that would be different numbers then, because it would be...
Yeah, it would be much lower numbers. It'd cut it in half. Well, more than half, because we'd be pulling in co-curriculars.
My only stipulation, though, I guess isn't the word, of requesting a cut to athletics, is I personally don't support cutting any teams, like wiping out any teams.
Right. Talk to us about the 35. Where did that come from in cutting
The
sports?
35,000 helped us, quite frankly, get to 750. in that scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And our thinking in that regard is we were going to look at our entire grades 3 through 12, co-curricular programs at Cider Mill and Middlebrook at the high school, and then the high school athletic program, to first of all to scrub it one more time to see if there were any reductions we could make that wouldn't eliminate programs. But then secondarily, that we might have to make further reductions in programs. Probably in clubs, probably. We'd have to look at a further reduction in undersubscribed clubs to get to that number. But initially, we would look at reductions that wouldn't cut programs from, supplies.
How do you define an undersubscribed club?
I'll use the high school as a model.
Okay.
The 4 that we cut to come up with the 9,600 were very undersubscribed.
Yeah.
So those were very, very low enrollment. We have to go back and take a careful look to define, tiers, if
Like
that's
less
what you're
than
asking.
10?
Those were
Yeah.
quite low,
Okay.
and one having trouble even launching it, actually.
Okay.
So we might have to, we're at less than 10 right now, we might have to gravitate up a little. And in doing so, it's an unfortunate decision, but there's such a wide range of opportunities, kids could make other choices.
Ken, I'm going to ask you to make the wild-ass guess, and I apologize for this. Scientific term. If we agreed to the $35,000 reduction, it leaves about $160,000 to go. If we spread that across all sports and co-curriculars, conceptually, what might that look like?
It would probably be a little less than half of the $400,000 model, so $100 or a little less than that per sport, and what did we say, $50
Can you
for
repeat the
clubs?
intent of the question?
Around what would the fee be?
Is that what you're
Yeah.
asking?
Fee or just reduction
To
in
raise-
cost?
fees.
No, it was a participation
Participation
fee
fees,
question.
right.
To
If we
raise
covered the gap at that
160.
point,
Yeah.
to raise $160,000, what would it look like?
So the clubs would probably be 50 at the high school and 25 at 3 through 8. And that
sports-
athletic fee would be around $100, or maybe
and-
slightly less.
And that wouldn't cut any programs.
Right.
Is that something that is different enough that might address some of your concerns, Laura?
Well, I have a question. Right now, we have students pay $50 for sports, for insurance.
For insurance.
Would that be part of the $100? Or is
That would have to continue.
That's in addition.
Is that in addition to
Yeah,
the
that's
$200
yeah.
also?
And that just covers
Yes.
the cost of the insurance.
That's a pass-through, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Can we also investigate just being able to get the gate receipts, however small they are, just talking to Sandy and seeing how that's accounted for and whether that can come into our budget?
I will ask.
And also,
It's not
even
gonna-
though...
It's not going to have an impact.
They're more disfigured than
No.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have
Yeah, you've been
memories.
there with the cuts they have to make. I
Yeah.
doubt that. If I was them, I certainly wouldn't give it up.
We've paid activity fees in the past, haven't we? Like, I remember...
About 10 or 12 years ago.
$25.
We did in
Or
1999, when there was an insurance crisis, that
And that was a temporary
it was a
measure.
For
one year.
co-curriculars, it was a one-time...
It was a,
Yeah.
Tim
It
was...
was for a couple of years, I think.
1 or 2 years, it was a stopgap in response to an insurance shortfall.
Okay.
And it was a $50 activity fee
Mhm.
that was across the co-curricular and athletic program.
I thought we were still paying it.
No.
You may be paying it.
We don't know
Right,
where
right.
those checks are going.
Would, so that would, as you said, it would drop the club fee for 3 through 8th grade down to approximately $25, the high school approximately $50, and the previously proposed participation fee at $200 would drop to probably something less than half of that, so
Right,
less than
half of it,
$100. Is that something
Well, before you go back to participation fees, can I just ask the board, was there any interest in entertaining the idea of a one administration position cut? Was there any interest in pursuing that idea, or is that off the table?
I'd rather cut athletics than administration.
Okay.
So I think that the administrators present have made a compelling case.
Okay.
I agree with you, too, Chris.
Yeah.
Our enrollment is increasing at the high school. We know that we are having increasing number of kids with social, emotional, and disciplinary problems. And as far as the central office position, the way Gary has organized the central office, you work as a team, and that's an awfully big player to be missing.
See?
Okay.
Yes, I...
Yeah, okay.
I wouldn't want...
All right, it was just something that was left dangling out there, so I wanted to just
So then,
close the loop on that.
so we have that option, and we have the other option of just cutting some sports.
Or giving the administration the ability to do an evaluation of the sports and seeing whether one sport should be cut or whether that a certain amount be taken out of all sports.
The problem is I don't think we have the time to do that between now and when we need to get information to Sandy.
Sandy needs a number.
She just needs a number. She doesn't
Our budget
know
is a
the
single
how.
number.
It's a single number.
But we have to decide by our next meeting so that the townspeople will know what our budget
yes.
is.
I think it's,
So we've got 2 weeks.
as one observer, of a process that would require us to look at further reductions to the athletic and co-curricular budgets. Just in the hypothetical that would get us to $160,000, you're going to cut programs at a level of impact. When the board, for example, thinks about freshman athletics at a magnitude of $110,000, just gives you a flavor for
That's all freshman sports.
all freshman athletics at
Transportation,
$110,000.
salaries.
So I just want to, in its simplistic form, we could generate those numbers. I just want to make it clear that you're going to be cutting programs. Those budgets have been scrubbed out of. We're going to go back and try to find another $35,000 without cutting programs. We may have to, but these budgets really have been scrubbed. And it's also important, I think, for the board to recognize that we had significant cuts in our co-curricular programs in the economic crisis days that were absorbed as well. So
When are they over?
Okay, so I'm going to put the question back out. We're stuck between a rock and a hard spot. Assuming we absorb that $35,000 cut, does this board have an appetite to cut freshman sports or all of hockey, or to implement what appears to be a much smaller participation fee schedule, recognizing that none of us want to do that, but we don't want to cut near the classroom too.
And if
I
I
don't
may,
think it's
within
an
a...
all or
I'm sorry.
nothing in terms of the sports. I mean, if you look at the budget's $1.1 million, we're short 160. If you take 10%, reduce the budget of each sport by 10%, you've got 110 of your 160.
Not really.
No?
Well, the athletic office, athletic director, secretary, the costs that are in
That's
the
right,
athletic
yeah.
office are not spread around
Okay,
the
you're right.
sports, so it would have to be larger
Yep.
than that. And that's probably about 20% of the budget.
Just
And
being too simplistic.
I'm sorry. If this proposal that you're considering at this point, just for my clarification, maintains the staffing for the reading teacher at Cider Mill and the first grade teacher at Miller Driscoll.
Correct.
Yes, I support that.
Gil, Laura, Karen,
Um,
does that change your
I
thinking?
feel up and we somehow get, I don't know, get it down to under 100, whether it's 75 or
Okay.
I could live with 75.
Do you want to do some quick numbers, Ken?
What's that?
It looks like we'll have the votes
Well,
to
that's
do
just
it.
me.
No, I know,
What's
but
75?
do you
What is-
think, based on these numbers, we can get it down to
What's
a participation fee of $75?
75.
And the club fees at 25 and 50.
I don't believe it'll get you the whole $160,000 that you need.
What's the estimate?
What does it get us to?
Yeah.
I think $75 per sport will get you about $80,000 to $85,000.
Plus hockey surcharge.
Are we still doing the hockey surcharge?
People? Thoughts?
My feeling is still that a participation fee isn't appropriate, and that this would continue for a long time, and every year we'll come back and have further increases in that.
And I get
So
that.
Gil, would you support eliminating hockey before you would support asking participants to pay a surcharge?
Yes.
And if that didn't pass, you'd support getting rid of a teacher?
I don't think we need to get rid of a teacher. I think that athletics has been not been looked at over the last several years. Their budgets have increased, I think, over the last 3 by about 120 to 150,000. And I think it's time to look at athletics, and we should really take a hard look at programs. I think we have to look at the programs.
Well, we're looking at 195,000 right now, including line item 21.
And if we just take a hard look at it, we're looking at 151,999 for hockey. And that would be plus the 35,000.
Oh, part of the 35.
Do you feel the same way, Karen? You would rather cut hockey than implement participation fee?
I would like to look at undersubscribed athletics. There are several that are below 20. And again, is there an opportunity for those students to participate elsewhere? I don't think, I'll say it again, I don't think that we have to provide every sport that there is out there.
True.
It's a good point, because if we're looking at eliminating clubs.
Right.
Yeah.
Undersubscribed
But,
clubs.
But I think this is the point in letting the administration do a quick evaluation of looking at the cost per student, per sport, whether they're undersubscribed or not.
And the question, too, what equipment do we absolutely need to provide, and what can be optional?
So as a point of clarification, I'm hearing that the administration's directive would be to look at what it would take from our co-curricular and athletic programs to get to 195,823 in lieu of participation fees?
I'd like to see that. That would help me make a decision.
Then how does the 35,383 fit in?
That's part of the
That's part of
195.
that's part of
Okay,
the-
fine.
That's already been accounted for.
Right.
So in effect, it's 195 plus the 35 that we need to...
So it's 2.
No,
No,
the
195
the
is the total.
35 is in the
Oh, you
195.
haven't-
Yeah.
You haven't taken the...
We haven't taken that.
So we're at 195. Okay.
What happens if we leave this discussion on this 195,823 till our next board meeting? Gary?
Well, it buys us some time to, I think we have some very difficult conversations to have, but it does buy us a little bit of time. I don't know where, having said that, I don't know where we're going to go with this, because if we don't want to cut out entire teams, and if shaving teams is not going to get us where we need to go,
Well, and if I
it
may...
doesn't give us too many options to play with.
It is also important for us to recognize that our representation here this evening included reductions in the reading teacher at Cider Mill and the first grade teacher at Miller Driscoll. That was a part of our recommendation. So in these scenarios, if they're off the board based on the board's advice and counsel, then I think I would like to know that we have some flexibility in looking at the 195 to just revisit our budget reductions in general, because we made assumptions that those were on the board. If they're off the board, and I'm not saying there's anything there, because we've done the homework, but I guess I'm asking, is the board asking us to look at a co-curricular budget that amounts to approximately between $200,000 and $300,000, and an athletic budget that's just over $1 million. So you're looking at, I'm just doing the math, 200,000 approximately out of 100, $1 million, $1.2 million, which is about, by my math, over a 20% reduction. It's going to be a tough number to hit, but we'll do the exercise. I don't know if there's any flexibility to look just to scrub the budget one more time.
I think there's
certainly.
Yes, I think there is flexibility. I mean, people have mentioned things in email, people have mentioned things tonight where they think that money is not being necessarily spent in the right way, right place. So I think there is that opportunity again.
So it wouldn't be just to focus on athletics, but you said you've used the reading teacher and the first grade teacher, you've excluded them, but in your evaluation, perhaps they should be back on the table.
I wouldn't agree with putting teachers back on the table. That's my personal take.
Yeah, I say take number 9 and number 23 off the table
I agree.
completely.
Okay.
I agree.
Laura, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I hate to make you do the numbers again, Ken. If you did $25 and $50 for co-curriculars and then $100 for sports, does that get us to 160 plus the 35?
What does the athletic number get us to for 75?
Hold on a second.
Hockey surcharge or not?
So 25 at...
You didn't do the aggregate number.
You said 25 at K at 3-8.
3-8.
50 at the high school?
Yes, and then 100 for sports.
Your pin drop.
Yeah, I was going to say something
I want to make sure. $169,000.
And that does not include the 35, or does?
No, that's just what the fees.
That's the fee.
So then
That's
plus-
the revenue.
Plus the 35 gets us to the
Now,
750.
you will have some level of hardship or decrease in participation.
Okay. Does that include the extra fee for hockey or not?
No.
Does not. So across the board, it's $100 per sport.
Mhm.
Would you be comfortable with that?
I had to ask one more question. I'm sorry. How do the building principals feel about the activity fee for co-curriculars
For a
at
question.
Mill and Middleborough and the high school? Can I have that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's either that or go back to the other exercise. I think I'd like to hear from the principals too. You okay with that?
As I listen to this, I'm hearing an equity between cuts in athletics and cuts in co-curricular. That's what is really tough word, but you're spreading the pain a little bit is what I'm hearing.
Julia?
Well, I'm just thinking of some of the co-curriculars, and I'm going to say that the co-curriculars are our enrichment program. So if we're charging students to participate in Science Olympiad, we're charging them for that. If we're charging them to look at the math counts program, we're undersubscribed. We may not have 10 students, but that's a crucial part of their day. So in many ways, this is our enrichment program. So we would be charging students $25 to take part in the enrichment program.
Jenny, do you want to weigh in on it? Jenny?
We would have 35,000, I think it is, co-curricular activities, which would include our intramurals and music and school store, basically. Our student activity group is what we would lose. We have lost it before and brought them back. And we also did have an activity fee for those. I think it was $25 or $50 one year when we had the shortfall.
And when we had the activity fee of $25 or $50, how big an impact do you think that had on participation?
I don't think it had any at all. Very little, if any, at that price.
Right. Okay.
And we did have scholarships for those who we needed to.
Okay.
And then we have scholarships as well.
Okay. Would you be comfortable with that? You would be as a superintendent?
Yeah, if we've taken some big hitters off the board, so there's not much more room.
Okay. Laura, would you be?
Our recommendation had initially a fee structure which is higher, so
Right.
and there's absent consensus on a fee, you have to look at that.
I feel sick when I think about charging participation fees, but I think I'd feel worse if we've got a reading teacher and a first grade teacher. And, part of it, my kids started school in California, and they said they didn't have anything there, so we had no music, no art, no physical education in the grade schools. So Wilton looks pretty good no matter what. And also, I was at Wilton High 100 years ago, and when they implemented participation fees, obviously they went away. So I would support it with the determination to work towards its elimination as soon as possible.
I would agree with you on that.
That's a good point.
Can I have a motion to accept the $35,000 cut on athletic fees, on the athletic budget, and then implement a participation fee across co-curriculars and athletics to make up the approximate $160,000 difference, assuming that athletics do not exceed $100. There is no premium placed on hockey, and clubs 3 to 8 are at $25, and the high school is $50. Can I have a motion on that, please?
Should I just change that?
Sure. Sorry, sure. Yeah, you want to change it? What do you want to change? Yeah.
I just would amend the hockey surcharge. I still think that there is some fairness in charging them some surcharge. Maybe it's not $500. Maybe it's a lesser fee, but it just, that's what I just want to put that idea out there, is to keep a surcharge potentially for that sport, but at a lesser rate. 500 seems kind of high. I would balk at that too if I was a hockey mom. But
thoughts, comments?
That's the only. But I could support it without too, so I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay. I'm sensing that it's not going to get support.
Okay.
So,
then.
Will you make the motion then?
Yes, so moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
There you go. All opposed?
Opposed, so thank you.
Thank you. It passes 4-2.
And you'll be reporting back to us then with that $35,000, where
Yes.
that is. Okay.
Right.
Now, future business announcements timeline. Our next meeting is April 25th. It's again here at 7 p.m. Although that may be amended. No, it won't be amended at this point. We're done. It's
Right.
It's going to be here, and
Right.
the town meeting is at the Middlebrook School Auditorium on May 7th. Comments from the public, as we have at the beginning and end of every meeting. Is there anybody from the public that would like to speak? Thank you.
I did just want to say one thing. I really appreciate the board's very difficult decisions and the process that you went through. I know it was not easy. I appreciate greatly that you made the pay to participate a little bit more equitable across all of our students. And I greatly appreciate that you did not surcharge hockey. And I know that that was a difficult decision, but I greatly appreciate it because there really is a lot of additional fees that that we pay. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Please tell your friends. Thank you.
Trust me, I will, as soon as I get home, I'll go out.
Is there anybody else who'd like to speak
Thank
from the
you.
public? Hearing none, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you for your input. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Most didn't go that way.
Cell phones plugged in over there. You saw those.
Sure. Are we allowed to dial people in? If Laura isn't here by the time we start discussing the budget?
Oh, they're just fine. Yeah. Running at me. That's thanks.
Right.
Which I should probably send you.
She wants to listen, not participate necessarily.
She's going to be here now.
Yeah, she's just worried.
She said if the agenda moves so quickly, basically, that she doesn't get here.
We did it at 6:15 with some hopes that
Traffic?
we
Yeah.
had some.
There was a lot of traffic this morning. 95 was shut, or this is the 95 or Merritt, one of them shut down in Chicago. There was a big gas leak. And so there was like awful backups. Yeah, this is dinner.
Oh, good. I thought you were sitting there eating yogurt. I am so glad.
It's
It's really good stuff.
Theirs is in their bowl on their table.
And here I thought it was just a big vat of sour cream.
I am not above eating that for dinner, let me tell you.
You're right, Ken.
Works for me.
For now.
Who's here? Here.
I have plenty. Would you like one?
It's a sharp fork. I wouldn't try it if I were you.
Geez, there was an awful there was awful gas bill. Well, this morning might have been.
I pulled out of my, in my street, as I pulled out of my street, and the traffic was just stopped, backed up all the way from the traffic light.
Well, the other night when I came over, the traffic light was on Linker.
Oh, really?
And it was backed up beyond my house, all the way down past the stop sign.
Oh, I saw it when they had just
When it wasn't-
stop sign
yeah.
over it. It was, I saw it backed up all the way.
Oh,
How are you?
Yeah, it's a gas station. Well,
I think that was.
they do.
Everyone sure people are going places. That
Well,
place takes me out to a place.
Coffee or
Yeah. That makes sense.
Well, that's, it is what it is. I emailed West and told them about because they can run into it. So
Don't worry, one more, because I know, one glass.
Now I can smell you.
One glass.
A little giada, vodka sauce, penne, meatballs.
Well, mine's the kind of the crock pot that is ready when I get home.
That's my favorite with cheese.
I'll follow you.
Yeah, probably enough, 3 or 4 probably.
Thank you.
So?
So like cook it ahead and let it sit, and then you cook and warm it up later.
We're going to go through their leadership.
Oh, yeah, lots of discussion.
Form as soon
I make those decisions.
I'll let you know. Yeah. Thank you. You're here.
Is he?
Outdoor time. We like that. What's that, were you? I tell you, I need a partner like that, you know. Oh, what's his name? He has no good deal, you know.
We get paid to do yard work.
I love it.
Unfortunately, they won't get.
Very, very good.
Are you weed whacking?
I'd love to. In fact, I said to Dave, I said, I gotta get the blade for
I have the weed whacker on wheels. I got a weed whacker first.
On wheels?
On wheels.
That's an intense.
It's a brush hog.
It's like a brush hog almost.
I'm afraid of what you're doing.
See, when Parks and Rec got to cut the I told Steve I would know.
I used to be a maintenance in a country club, so I don't know.
It's about 1:15 now, so we do have a quorum, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. We do have 2 board members who are in transit, and hopefully they'll get here before we have to make any major votes. Has everybody had a chance to review the agenda? Can I have a motion to approve it?
There's an amendment to move, if in the interest of, move the 5B to follow the reports and recognition session. And that was a...
Yeah, that makes sense. We'll move the naming of school facilities
Right.
policy discussion ahead of the budget discussion. That way we'll give the 2 board members who are not here a little bit more time to get here. Is everybody okay with that? Motion to approve as amended? All in favor? Aye. Unanimous. With that, as we do at the beginning and end of every one of our regular board meetings, we have an opportunity for comments from the public. Is there anybody that would like to come up and speak?
Hi.
Amy, state your name.
My name is Amy. My name is Amy Harris. I should say my name is Steve Hudspeth, right? But I live at 67 Wilton Crest. I was watching the Board of Finance meeting last week, and I'm sorry I didn't get to the public hearings. It's a tough week, Holy Week. But I was distressed watching all of that. It was quite the circus, I felt. But for one thing, I feel like you've all been given instructions now to go over your budget, that you don't have to turn in your budgets at the exact amount. I think that was pretty clear. And I'm really concerned about this participation fee, which is why I'm here. I hope the fees are, when you consider fees, which I hope you don't, I thought they were already considered, I thought they were already considered in December meeting, when Chris and Lori had done a study of them or whatever. But I hope it's equitable among the different after-school activities, that it's not just sports or not just athletics, that the theater gets considered and things like that. And I hate to say that because I feel like the arts are always getting the short end of the stick. But at the same time, I'm also hoping, I was looking at the budget online, and thanks for having it there. I was finding a way to cut if you could take away the marching band from the away games. The cuts are just, they're over the top, and I hate to see other kids not get what my kids have in the school system. All right, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Please, come forward.
Hi.
Hi, state your name.
Yes, my name is Claire Craven. I sent you all an email right before here. I'm not sure if everyone got it. So, did everyone, everyone able to read it?
Yes.
All right. So, I think, I'm sorry, forgive me 1 minute. I just was going to pull it up. I hate to waste your time. But I think for all of us it will be.
I have a copy here if you'd like it.
I have it now, thank you. Appreciate it. but I would like for public record for it to be read, and so that hopefully you will address my concerns. I appreciate your hard work, time, and energy each of you put forth in support of our Wilton students. I also understand whenever cuts are mandated and thus difficult choices are made, there will always be unhappy constituents. That being said, I hope each of you will take a few minutes to reflect on the impact of the recommendations from Dr. Richardson specific regards to athletes and hockey players. I understand you are under great pressure to instill pay to play, as many of our area towns have already done so. I actually support your decision to do so. But rather than following the lead of other towns, I would ask you to consider being a leader in a more equitable option of pay to participate. As a school that values distinguishing efforts of all our students, whether athletes, science and mathletes, or artists and musicians, I'm not sure why we would target only athletes to pay. Why wouldn't the band be charged as well, especially given the expense to travel to each away football game? And by the way, I love that we do that. What about all the science, math, student government, debate clubs of varying degrees? In addition, I really am having a difficult time understanding why you would penalize hockey players when they are the only students who already truly have paid to play, given the high cost of equipment and ice time in the off-season. As a parent of 3 hockey players in just 2 seasons, so as of September of last year, I have spent $3,077.36 in equipment alone. In addition, I spent $16,250 in just travel, clinic, off-ice fees, not to mention 20 months of gas, fuel, and hotels for 2 to 3 games per weekend and tournaments. And that's my choice. Now, in addition to the $250 annual booster fee, the fundraising and miscellaneous expenses that come with playing hockey at the high school, you're asking me to spend another $2,100 per year because of the ice time costs. Well, what about the football stadium built at the school? We don't charge the football players an amortization allocation for the fact that we as a town decided to build a football stadium. The same for a gymnastics gym or any of the other accommodations that we make for sports. What about swimmers who have outside facility costs at the Y? We do not allocate those costs to them. This town voted to incur the ice rental cost over building a rink. Although it would not have been my decision, it is one that I understand and I can respect. However, why now are we passing on the monetary ramifications of that decision to our players and not looking at the overall expenses rather than just this one line item? Again, we don't charge football players for the stadium. I am a parent of 1 sophomore and 2 freshman students at Wilton High School. Like many parents, we have worked hard for many years to be able to provide opportunities for our children to each grow up well-rounded with exposure to athletics, arts, and academics. This often meant hundreds of dollars in extra expenses and time driving them to differing activities, teaching them all along the way the importance of commitment, follow-through, and always trying your best. I am proud of each of my students. They are each John Hopkins scholars, varsity athletes, and excellent musicians. Disciplined and respectful of those around them, and mindful, too, of all the differing talents that their fellow students also excel in. In other words, we've succeeded in our purpose of raising well-rounded future taxpayers who will accept others' contributions to the world that each of them has been placed in as just as valued as their own. So then why, as a school board, would we now segregate and show preferences for one group of excellent students over another? I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Should you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer.
I think we're all set. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the public? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda.
You know how much you love this. I love this seat. I don't like to drone on forever.
Say your name.
I have to say that loud in public again. Tiffany TC, 80 Musket Ridge Road. I'm really disheartened that the pay-for-play has come up at the last second with no notification to parents, or this room would be
out the door. We've learned that from years ago at Cider Mill. I understand where we're coming from, but I also understand that combing through that budget for the past week, there are so many things that I, as a parent, see could go. Looking at smart boards for the health and gym class, smart boards for the art department, smart boards for the photo classes. I have high school kids, and you ask them, do you need a smart board in band? She looked at me and said, why? What would we use it for? I mean, these are all things I look at, and you tell me we're going to do pay for play, we're going to cut other things. My elementary schooler had a math textbook that I looked up in the book, thousands of dollars. It came home, it sat on my dining room table for 8 months, never opened once. There's no need to. A hardcover, brand new math book for 2nd grade, to me, was the biggest waste of money. But I look at some of these costs that are coming in the technology budget. Love technology, we need to advance, but there's a huge, huge waste. Adding smartboards to classrooms, especially at the high school level, there are teachers right now that my kids have that have never used their smartboard. My daughter has a foreign language teacher for 4 years. They've used it a handful of times. Why? Why do we have to mount every projector? I mean, I feel like I want a new car, but I'm not going to go buy one right now because I'm going to wait. Why does everything have to always be right now, right now, right now? I mean, that $2 million in the tech budget, I'm mortified. But to not give parents notice either, that we're having a meeting like this tonight out of nowhere, coming from just last week, I know we've got to make cuts, obviously, and there's huge cuts that can be made. And I, as a parent, see them over and over and over. I feel like we need to take time, which we don't always have, but to look back at the schools. I do appreciate going through each school's budget. I was very impressed at how they really trimmed down a lot of things. But there is always room for improvement, and we've got to find it from somewhere. I mean, I really hope that you can take another look and see at how some things can be utilized that we already have and move them around, especially looking at the high school level with things that we don't need in every classroom. The lower schools, the kids need to be equal, yes. The high school, you don't need that. You've got classes that don't need smart boards, that don't need iPads, that don't need a lot of things. But I feel like we're so busy trying to put money in everywhere we can instead of looking at, can we hold off on this? We shouldn't hold off on this. And maybe talking to our students and seeing what they actually use instead of just what we think that they always need. Because I talk to the high schoolers that work for me, my own high schoolers, and the responses I get from them is amazing. Why would I use that? Why would I have that? I've never seen one of those. We actually have them. So I really, really hope that we can take a serious look at some of this stuff versus instantly jump for pay for play and possibly cut out a lot of kids that could play sports that are not going to be able to. And it's not even just pay for play. I mean, I'm really disheartened by looking at the amount of requests in the technology budget alone of things that sound fields that don't make classrooms equal. We'll put 3 in each cottage. How does that benefit all of the kids other than the 3 classrooms that's going to get it, and that's it? I know it's a tough job, and I definitely wouldn't want to be in your shoes. But I do hope that, we take a serious look at some more of these things, because we're looking at a lot of money, and we're going to have some serious angry parents after spring break if this pay for play ends up coming into play tonight. Thank you.
Are there any other comments from the public? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Everybody had a chance to take a look at that? I have a motion to approve. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. I need to abstain because I was not here for the last meeting, so I can't approve those minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. At which point we move on to the board chair's report. I spent a fair part of the last couple of days preparing comments around what I wanted to say this evening, and nothing really fit properly. The reality is, we have an administration that put together a very thoughtful budget. We have a Board of Ed that spent a lot of time looking at that budget. We put a tremendous amount of questions back to the administration. They thoughtfully considered those questions, responded back to us. As those who've sat through our budget presentations have seen, we put forth what we felt was a very aggressive, thoughtful, and lean budget. However, last week, the Board of Finance decided to cut that budget by $750,000. It was based on a number that they decided the town could afford of 1.75%. Now, part of our budget met that target. Part of our budget that we really have very little control over because of mandates and legislation did not meet that budget. Because of that, our overall budget was above that number. But consequently, we have been cut, and some of those cuts were further debated at the Board of Finance level, and they felt very strongly that we could somehow come up with $400,000 in participation fees. We haven't been given any specific detail as to how they came up with that number. We've had our participation fee study on our website since this team developed it last fall. We've shown where all of the surrounding towns developed revenues. They come nowhere near that. But nevertheless, that's boiled into the $750,000 that we have to deliberate on today. It's a hard task, and I know I've spoken with the administration over the last few days. I know that I've gotten feedback from board members. I've gotten feedback from the community, and there's no silver bullet. There's no easy way to do what we need to do today. And just like the weather, some people are going to be happy with what we do, and some people are going to be unhappy. It's a tough seat to sit in at this table, but I have to say I am proud to sit at this table with each of you because I believe we're worthy of the task of trying to do the best for the schools and the town as we take on what I think is a miserable job. Gary?
Okay. Thank you. Some celebration items tonight. The Cider Mill reports in the PTA Reflections Contest. It's both Cider Mill and Middlebrook. We had some winners in the state competition. We've had great participation in the past, which is a real tribute to our arts and language arts program. Bryson Addison, 4th grade, won first place in the state, music composition, spring song. Jenna, is it Kirinsich, 3rd grade, won first place in visual arts for her work piece called Character. And at Middlebrook, Kate Seelert won first place in the state. She's a 6th grader for her photography. Carrie Keogh, 8th grader, 2nd place in the state for photography. Emily McCann, 7th grade photographer, 3rd place, and honorable mention, Kate Seelert again, for visual arts. The winners that I just announced will be honored at the state awards banquet on May 9th. So that's a really nice tribute once again to our arts program in Wilton. In the language arts area, there was a Fairfield County World Language Share. One of the things that people may not know about is that our teachers are very active in professional organizations, both formal and informal. And, for example, our Jim Lucy has hosted sessions with chemistry teachers from around the state who come on a Saturday, usually, or after school hours, and share best practice and share ideas and information. The Foreign World Language people did this. It was held at our own Cider Mill Library on March 21st. It's an annual event, and teachers came from all over Fairfield County to share teaching ideas and techniques that they have found successful. Our own fluent German speaker and great high school principal, Bob O'Donnell, welcomed the group, I'm sure in fluent German, of more than 30 who had come from Greenwich, Westport, Bethel, Reading, Buchanan, and Wilton. So, again, another nice example of ongoing professional development. The Cider Mill 5th graders, there was the World Language Fashion Show. It's a very active time of year for world language departments at each of the schools. The Cider Mills fifth graders had their fashion show last week. Each house's presentations were judged by fifth grade classroom teachers, and winning group represented Cider Mill at the first Fairfield County World Languages Cultural Festival at Darien High School last week, April 4th. K-12 students from all over Fairfield County were invited to this special event to celebrate foreign cultures and present their world language skills. So again, it's making the language that they share something that kids see applications of the language in real life. In the area of writing, our congratulations to 8th grade student Katie McAdams, who earned recognition of one of 10 Connecticut writers in the School for Ethical Education's Laws of Life essay writing. Laws of Life is a writing assignment designed to help students think, reflect, write, and discuss the core values they believe help them live their lives successfully. All 8th grade students at Middlebrook participated in this essay contest, and Katie will be honored with Mrs. Candles, her English teacher, and her parents at a character celebration on May 1st in New Haven. So again, congratulations to her. This is a terrific honor. In the state spelling bee competition, congratulations to another 8th grader, Emily, is it Mitrione, excuse me, who qualified for the final round in the 25th annual state geography bee. It's geography bee, not spelling bee, I beg your pardon. And placed 4th in the state. Emily remembers the question, and I'm going to ask the board right now. This is a very intelligent Board of Education. Which African country borders Burkina Faso and Libya?
Nigeria.
Whoa! Syracuse education pays off. And I heard
she reads very well.
Come on, give it to me.
That was a big Burkina Faso.
They won't play along with it. Emily said she has a map near her bed and loves studying it. She hopes to do something with the UN when she grows up. So again, a nice honor for her. One of the programs you've heard us talk about is the Top Inclusion Models. Top Inclusion Models, it's a program to work with general ed students who work with some of our students with special needs. They visited each of the Middlebrook teams on Friday and presented a variety of topics involving inclusion. That's the theme of their efforts, like Best Buddies and other groups. They encouraged the students to mix it up at lunch and join them in the cafeteria during the lunch waits. Reviews of the visit were overwhelmingly positive. Students look forward to seeing the Top Inclusion Models again at the 8th grade dinner dance in June. And finally, a belated note, I noticed that I was so pleased, I know how busy you all are, that I think most of you, if not all of you, were able to join the Tech Expo last Wednesday. And a belated note of thanks to our wonderful tech director, Matt Hepfer, and to the tech instructional leaders, students, presenters, and we had many parent volunteers who were helping make the program possible and who made the April 3rd event such a great success. So one of the joys I think we all have, and I know I just got little snippets from each of those of you I saw, was how exciting it was to see students talking and interacting with the technology. I needed Matt to translate for me for some of the things that I was being told, and I thought it was a really terrific event. I'm so pleased that so many of our parents come out and get to see it, that you as policymakers were able to join the event. So it's a great day, Matt.
Thank you. Committee reports.
Last Monday, I attended the CAVE workshop on the Common Core state standards and found that to be very informative and interesting. And I'll pull out some of the slides and things like that and make a package for all of you and share that information.
Thank you. Great. Thank you.
On the restrooms, that project is moving along. This Thursday, there will be a walkthrough for potential bidders on the project, and the bids will be opened on April 25th.
Wonderful. Anything to update on security?
Hal Clark invited Dick Duval and I to attend the Security Task Force meeting because we're on the Miller Driscoll Building Committee, and I found it absolutely fascinating. What I didn't realize was that 95% of our threats are internal, and only 5% are external. And it made me realize how important the mental health aspect of all of this is, especially those teens that identify children who are potentially at risk. And in this case, the child that is most often at risk is someone who feels like they don't belong and that they're a loner. Those are the children that, in many cases, have been violent.
I think he also emphasized, Ken had reported that he talked about something that I think is such an important factor, and that is the culture of the school, where you develop a comfort level where if kids, you know, on the federal level, they're saying if you see something, say something. You've seen the spots on TV. But I think for just, if some things are happening that seem out of whack, to have kids share that. And I think in a lot of, I've had personal experience in other districts where students have come and said, you know, I'm worried about so-and-so. And again, it's not, I think it's helpful, and I think that can help prevent some events. And I think he emphasized the culture of the building.
He made a clear distinction between security guards and SROs.
Right.
And it's the SRO that develops that confidence, that relationship with the kids, and the peers are the greatest source of information about each other.
And our faculty members too. Too.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, just another shout out to Matt for the Tech Expo. It was wonderful, and particularly the learn how to use a TriCaster within the audiovisual area, and seeing what is actually going on in the preschool with the smart boards. Just pretty amazing.
Thank you.
Yes, I've been the observer on the PTA Council all year, and it's kind of been swimming along. I don't know if anyone's aware. They haven't had a president, and someone stood forward for next year, so there will be a PTA Council next year, and there has been this year too, but officially and everything on board if the nominations go forward. So
wonderful.
It was exciting.
Chris?
No.
Right. At this point, we move on to policy 6112, school day. Review and discuss.
All right.
I hope your iPad's working better than mine.
It is. Maybe I got on before you did. All right. Good evening, all. With the proposal going forward for the full-day kindergarten implementation next year, it is requiring us to go ahead and update our school policy regarding the school day. So the changes are very minor, but they just reflect the exclusionary language regarding kindergarten and the times for which those students will attend school. Question?
Questions, comments?
All right.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
It'll be on our agenda at the next meeting for review and discuss, review and approve.
Sounds good to me.
Or do we have any issues with it going on the consent agenda?
Jane, I have a question. That doesn't reflect the opt-out provision, does it?
No, it does not. Because as a board, the board has taken the position that that is what all students will do. Should there be students who decide to exclude themselves from that, that would be the number who would not participate, but as the general policy would be for all of that. Yes.
So we'll look for that on the consent agenda.
Sure. Sounds good.
Great, thank you. We now move on to action items, and as we changed the agenda at the beginning of the meeting, we move on to policy 1331, naming of school facilities.
Mm-hmm. And when I was here the last time, you had asked a few questions, particularly about what a facility was. I sent that to you in Friday notes, and then the language is also reflected here in the policy. Does anyone have questions about that?
I don't have a question about that.
Okay.
I still am a little concerned that this policy is not specific enough to give guidance on when we name a facility after someone. I said at the last meeting, I think that's really the highest honor we can give an individual as a school system is to name a building after them. And I appreciate that we don't want to lock future boards into any of our great thinking at this time. But I think future boards might benefit from some of our
great
guidance. Great thinking.
Well, it is one of those double-edged swords. Because if you were to lock yourselves into, let's say, a 10-year scenario, or even an 8-year or 7-year scenario, and should somebody come, we have a science teacher who comes in and discovers and creates a vaccine for cancer. then
I would name a
we
building after them.
exactly. But if they had only been an employee here for 2 years, and your policy indicates that you can't until they've been here for 8 years, then what do we do?
Well, I was reading through, I was like, I could fit all these criteria. We could have the Christine L. Finkelstein High School, and clearly we don't, that's not deserved. So,
Some people
well, I know you guys, maybe my birthday's coming, but,
I think, and I have not been here that long, but I do believe, I don't know about your national prominence. There is language in here that speaks to national prominence. I do, unfortunately. So I do think there is some language that does really push us to a higher level.
maybe it's just, we let 2 weeks go by, and, so I looked at it again, and I just thought, could we clarify it somehow to say, for service that went above and beyond normal job requirements, or am I the only one who is troubled by this? If so, then we'll just let it go.
Well, I thought the way the section above that was, the diverse groups of people who had to be on a committee, that there's 3 to 5 names, I think kind of counters, you know what I mean? Like, it's not going to happen suddenly. It's not going to be...
And it's not just based on the membership of the board at that time. It does have to be generated from the community, through the community, vetted through other people and organizations. And I do think, to that point, you would not just simply say, well, because I have been such a great director of HR, therefore you should name something after me. I mean, if you want to, that's fine. But I think what you would need to have is that there would be something that is created, and we say, as a result, what do we want? Is there a name we would like to associate with this facility or building or space? And it would get vetted through with 2 or 3 or 4 other people. So it's not just we're looking to honor one, but we're going to look at that person in terms of a group of other people.
Okay.
There was also questions regarding
who has the ability to name
the
facility.
ownership, the town versus the school.
Correct. And in the Friday notes, I had indicated in there that while the town owns the facilities, the Board of Education is the user of the facilities, and therefore, as long as the facility is being used for school purposes, that the Board of Education has the right to name the facility. So even though we don't own it, we can still name it because we are the primary users of that space.
And that was from?
From our attorneys.
From
But that's my point, yeah.
which attorneys?
From the board's attorneys, who
Board of Ed attorneys.
Board of Ed attorneys?
Who are very well versed in the naming of school facilities.
But with the Board of Selectmen.
Well, yeah, the Board of Selectmen
agree
to
with that.
I think what they're using.
Right, that's my question. Yeah.
This is something that is not unique to Wilton. In all towns and districts, they have the same thing, and it falls the same lines.
Did we clarify, like, who named the Christine Lilly Field? That came from the town, though, didn't it?
I cannot speak to that.
Right.
Well, then, could we have the Board of Selectmen decide they want to name this, Bill Brennan Professional Library? Or is it just...
Because it's a school facility.
Town.
Correct, but the town is not using it. The schools are using it. Therefore, it's under the school's control.
I'd feel better if we could at least have Tom speak with the town's attorney, just to clarify it.
Sure, not a problem.
Yeah, just to make sure that the town officials are in support of it as well.
Sure. Can do. All right. And then if I were to get the not in agreement, can we move it to the consent agenda for next meeting? Or would you like me to come back again?
I'd like to.
Not a problem.
I'm going to take it back home and think about it.
Okay, that's fine. Not a problem.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I'm going to pick out a building. Yeah, I had my eye on something.
Right next to the device station.
Wear you down enough.
We now move on to the budget revision discussion.
The cabinet and principals have been spending time since last week's meeting with the Board of Finance, coming up with a recommended list of cuts. So tonight we've asked Tim and Ken to share the administration's recommendation, and that will lead to a conversation about the issues at hand. So welcome. Thank you.
Well, certainly since the deliberations of a week ago today, in which the Board of Finance exercised its civic duty and reduced our budget, or the Board of Education's budget, I should say, by $750,000, we have been involved in a series of conversations as a leadership team regarding thoughtful ways to develop recommendations to the board about how best to find those monies. Those deliberations included a meeting last Friday morning with our senior leadership team and rather routine meetings, let's say, at the cabinet level over the course of the last few days. I think it's important to remind the board that we have been very responsive, I think, as a school community with the support of the Board of Education in navigating these difficult economic conditions of the last 5 years. And as you know, during that time, we've had to make reductions to our budget, which included our third grade world language program, which included the mentor program at Wilton High School, the enrichment programs at the elementary school. Instructional leadership positions have been eliminated. We did endure reductions to our curriculum development, professional training, supplies, and technology projects during that time. Last year, due to productive negotiations, we were in a budget season where we were able to restore a great deal of that funding for the curriculum development, professional training, supplies, technology, etc. The other piece that is certainly worth noting is during that time, our class size averages, although within board practice ranges, have gone from the low end of those ranges to the high end of the ranges. The reason I mention that is there's a context for this thought process that has made these deliberations quite difficult, as Mr. Likely alluded to in his introductory remarks.
I didn't think I alluded to it. I said it was
You were
difficult.
direct. So this has been a challenge. We obviously have felt very comfortable with the budget as proposed that was endorsed by the Board of Education. But at the end of the day, we need to find the number, and tonight we'd like to share with you our recommendation for the reduction of $750,000. I do want to inform the board that we had some guiding principles that were part of our deliberations. Certainly, we've been emphasizing that any reductions made should be as far away from the classroom as possible, trying to protect class size. We also have routinely acknowledged the extent to which the special education budget recommendations are to a large extent non-controllable. We have been making every effort to look at creative sourcing for funding through possible grant opportunities as part of our conversations, and have been quite deliberative about the idea of participation fees and the extent to which that would have to be part of our recommendation. The process began at $0. As we deliberated about reductions, we started at zero and tried to engage an exercise where we prioritize reductions that would get us to the $750,000 level. So as we go through our recommendations, we'd like to use that logic, if you will, to initially report to you recommendations that we feel are least painful, if that's the right word, to reductions that become more problematic in terms of the impact on our student learning outcomes. So the initial recommendations for savings are based on operations, and I guess you might describe them as what categories? Operations, and furniture, supplies. So I'm going to ask Ken to go through initially a series of recommendations from those categories, and then we'll go from there.
At the staff replacement savings, we're recommending that we increase that by $66,279. Since the board's last discussion on the budget, we've been notified of 2 additional teachers retiring, and these are the projected savings from those 2. And just for your information, thus far, we've received notification of 5 teachers retiring. Traditionally, at this time of year, I would build in another 2 anticipated that we'll probably find out about later, and then 5 unpaid leaves of absence for the next year. So that's what the total is that we're putting in the budget, and that adds up to a little over $435,000. And we'd previously had $369,000 in that account for the proposed budget. So we're increasing it by $66,000. Since our last discussion, we've also locked in heating oil and diesel fuel for next year. Heating oil, we're saving, I had originally budgeted the same price that we're paying this year. Heating oil, we're saving about 13 cents a gallon on 260,000 gallons, and diesel fuel about 20 cents a gallon on about 95,000 gallons. And these are the numbers resulting from that. The furniture is, we generally try to budget money every year to replace some furniture district-wide. Most of this recommended cut is coming from the high school, where we felt we could go another year without replacing as much as we wanted to. And we came up with that number.
So now, continuing onward, we were recommending a reduction of $9,600 in the club and activity program at Wilton High School. Principal O'Donnell has identified certain clubs in his budget where there's sentiment that the clubs may be undersubscribed at a certain level where we can absorb that reduction. And now we're into technology. Director Hepfer scrubbed his budget, looking very closely at the recommendations, and we're recommending a $100,000 reduction in our technology budget. And of course, as you know, technology is increasingly such a part of the fabric of our work that certainly this does create concerns about impact. We do, in terms of trying to describe the vast majority of those reductions, we are looking at smartboard technology and looking to defer those purchases. We also hope that this may be an area where we may be able to recover some of that funding through grant opportunities. So $100,000 from technology projects. We're looking at a $61,525 reduction from our textbook accounts. The primary area where we think we can realize this savings is in the recommendation that we adopt a new algebra textbook at Middlebrook in grades 7 and 8. That dollar amount is approximately $40,000 of the total. And we believe that as a result of the gap analysis work we've done between the Common Core expectations and the demands of a rigorous Algebra 1 experience, that we in fact are looking more strategically at the use actually of our Math and Focus materials, the Course 3 book, which is the most advanced book that we're using at Middlebrook, that in its scope and sequence explores the vast majority of Algebra 1 topics in a highly rigorous way. So there's a thought process that we're looking at recently where we could actually use the Course 3 Math and Focus materials, which we would supplement with topics that aren't covered that would be found typically in an Algebra 1 program, such as quadratics. We feel that we could absorb this reduction in a way where we still could meet the demands of our algebra program next year in grades 7 and 8. In fact, it may buy us some time in looking more closely at the use of Math and Focus materials for Algebra 1 instruction as we navigate these difficult waters around the Common Core, where we could determine then that it may be more appropriate to buy a traditional Common Core-based Algebra 1 textbook. It's not ideally what we had hoped for, but It's something that we think is a creative way of trying to find some funding for these reductions. There are other textbook reductions recommended, primarily grammar books, and then some more miscellaneous textbooks at the lower levels, and we think we, again, can come up with a total of $61,525 in textbook reductions. You can see we're getting closer to the classroom. The next area of reduction is in the area of curriculum and professional development. We're recommending an $80,000 reduction in those accounts. I'll start with professional development. The recommendation is that we reduce funding for professional development across all 4 buildings, Miller Driscoll, Cider Mill, Middlebrook, and the high school, and in the special education accounts, the technology accounts, and the district accounts by approximately 30%. Although not ideal and hard-hitting, we do hope that at least we can recover some of that funding through grant sources. Well, we'll revisit our grant opportunities in those areas and see what we can do to recover what in effect is approximately $50,000 of reductions in our professional development accounts. And again, we'd like to reassure the board at some level that represents a 30% reduction. So we still have 70% of those funds available for training next year. The next area is in summer curriculum. And in that area, we're recommending a reduction of $30,000 in summer curriculum work. And in my role as assistant superintendent, I've recommended that the reduction to meet that $30,000 threshold come entirely from the district level allocation of summer curriculum days. We had 200 days in our budget for district level coordination of summer curriculum, which to a large extent supplements building level projects and meets the needs primarily at this point of Common Core alignment. We would recommend that we reduce that from 200 down to 63. And by doing that, prioritize and keeping intact our building-based summer curriculum projects. And if the board, and I'm sure you may have done this, if you look at the building-based projects which are identified in your budget book, you will see that many of those projects have Common Core alignment objectives. So in my role, I feel somewhat comfortable that we'll be doing the good work at the building level. The piece that we'll have to be careful about in the coming school year is around articulation. In other words, K-12 articulation of the work that's ongoing. And one recommendation would be to ask our instructional leadership teams to meet more often during the school year in an effort to articulate, and by that I mean look closely at K-12 growth and development in our curriculum practices. So again, not ideal, but we think very strategic in terms of the recommendation. At this point now, we're up to approximately $420,000 in reductions, and at this point we determined that the next reduction would impact the reading teacher at Cider Mill School, that recommendation, to put forward additional literacy instructional support at Cider Mill. And as you know, we devoted a lot of time and energy to conversations around the extent to which we have endorsed a model that evolves the role of the reading specialist from what is currently primarily an opportunity to work in a pull-out fashion with students to a pull-in opportunity where our reading specialists will work closely with general classroom teachers. And as you know, that was a significant part of the full-day kindergarten proposal, which puts reading specialists in with general classroom teachers in grades 1 and 2. By cutting the Cider Mill reading specialists, we're going to have to slow down that opportunity to have our reading specialists work with general classroom teachers, primarily to impact and help diagnose and evaluate and work closely with our challenge students. But also, as you know, the other piece of that has been to develop the capacity of our general classroom teachers to implement effective reading practices. So that was a difficult decision that we made. So that brings us to $500,000 of reductions. And it was at this point that, as we considered additional reductions working with our leadership team, we made a decision that runs counter to the strongly held view we've held routinely, at least through my many years in serving as both a teacher and administrator in our district, around the issue of participation fees. It was at this point that we determined that participation fees had to be next on the runway in order to move forward without further reductions to programs that we feel would have a significant impact not only on instructional programs but school operations. So our recommendation to the board would be to consider $250,000 as a recommended amount to use participation fees as a revenue enhancement. And our recommendation is that that money would be generated through our interscholastic athletic program. It's important to note that over the course of this economic time period that I've described over this last 5 years, that our athletic program has to a large extent not been a part of recommended reductions. We've protected our athletic program. And I know that we don't need to look back. We need to be in the here and now, but it is at a point now where we may, or we recommend that we join many other school districts and implement a participation fee schedule that will impact our athletic program. Our proposal to how to best accomplish that, you, I'm sure, recognize how difficult it is to generate that kind of revenue. And just to give you a sense of a fee structure that would accomplish that outcome, and we would be open-minded about how to go about generating that revenue, perhaps in other creative ways, but an example of how we would do that. And in fact, our recommendation at this point is you would impose a $200 participation fee for our student athletes in each of the sports in which they participate. And then also we're recommending a surcharge for those students who participate in our ice hockey program. That money directly related to ice time. In sum, the money's generated from a participation fee of $200 per sport plus the hockey surcharge. It works out again to approximately $220,000 for the participation fee and $30,000 for the surcharge in our hockey program, that fee. So that generates the $250,000 in revenue. And in sum, you have the $500,000 in recommendations of reductions from our operating budget plus $250,000 recommended in participation fees from our interscholastic athletic program at the high school, which meets the $750,000 objective. Now, what I'd like to do, in fairness to the difficult questions at hand, is provide the board with alternatives that we've developed that, to a large extent, look at varied revenue enhancement ideas. So the board can see a continuum of what our cuts would look like if we were to take the $750,000 entirely from our operating budget up to a scenario where we would look to generate $400,000 in revenue enhancement and how that would impact the cuts that we had recommended. So let me look at an alternative scenario that would generate not the $250,000 recommended, but $150,000 recommended. In this alternative, which we've described as alternative 2, because of the logic of the revenue sequence, to In effect, what we'd be doing then is raising $150,000 in revenue. $120,000 of that would come from a participation fee in athletics, and then $30,000 once again from the hockey surcharge. So when you do the math, we've just lost $100,000 in revenue. We've gone from $250 to $150. So we need to provide the board with an explanation of what we would reduce to find that $100,000. What we would do is we would increase our textbook reduction from $61,525 to $75,160. We would look to make further reductions in our textbook account. You'll see now how the cuts become more dramatic. To find this $100,000 an increase in textbooks, we would reduce a 10-month secretary at the high school by 0.5 FTE. We would reduce in science instructional leadership at Cider Mill by 0.5. We would reduce a unified arts instructional leader at Cider Mill by 0.5. We would reduce a library media specialist at the high school by 0.5. We would reduce a library media specialist at Miller Driscoll by 0.5. So the net, I haven't specified the specific dollar amounts of those reductions, but in net, textbooks plus the headcount reductions that we're recommending and the instructional leadership recommendations yields $100,000 in savings. And I'd like to emphasize to the board that you can see why we were very uncomfortable at the $500,000 mark in terms of moving to the revenue recommendation, which we shared with you originally. So that gives the board a scenario where your pay to participate would be at the $150,000 level and not the $250,000 level. Now let me share with you what our recommendation would look like if we were not to generate any revenue for pay to participate. Well, clearly we would already include the reductions that I just went through, which again was an increase in textbooks, the 0.5 reduction in the 10-month secretary at the high school, the 0.5 science instructional leadership at Cider Mill, the 0.5 unified arts instructional leadership at Cider Mill, the 0.5 reduction in the library media specialist at the high school, the 0.5 library media specialist at Miller Driscoll. Now in this scenario, we would have to find an additional $150,000 of reductions in our operating budget to get revenue down to zero, where in fact the $750,000 would come entirely from our operating budget. In this scenario, we would recommend further reductions to our athletic club and activity program, totaling approximately $35,000. We would reduce a computer lab technician at the high school by 0.5, and we would finally impact class size, where we would recommend the reduction of the proposal of a grade 1 teacher at Miller Driscoll, which would, for the board's information, bring the class size average to approximately 20.3. 20.2, just above the board's practice of 18 to 20 in the kindergarten and first grade level. So it's at that level that you get to class size, and in that scenario, you run through those reductions. It totals $750,000 of reductions from our operating budget, and there is no revenue enhancement. Now finally, let me discuss with you what happens if you, as a board, wanted to generate more revenue above the $250,000 we're recommending. Well, in that case, we would be able to restore all of the recommended cuts that I had just gone through, which again, I'm not going to run through the entire list, but the $150,000 scenario and the zero scenario in revenue, all of those reductions would be restored. And then...
just for clarification,
yes,
for people watching at home,
right.
This recommendation is based on proposing a participation fee of $400,000.
Correct.
Which is what the Board of Finance came up with.
I'm sorry, I should have been clear about that. This recommendation includes a revenue enhancement of $400,000. So in raising $400,000 through a participation fee structure, we need to find $350,000 in reductions from our operating budget. So in effect, you restore the $250,000 in reductions that we had recommended already, or I had shared with you in the scenario where we reduce 150, in the scenario where we have no revenue enhancement, in the recommended scenario, which generates 250. In this scenario, we would restore all the reductions that I talked about at that $500,000 level. And then, since you're going from 250 to 400 in revenue, we would restore $150,000 of reductions that were part of the 500,000. And in this scenario, we would restore the reading teacher at Cider Mill. We would restore $70,000 of the $80,000 in the recommended reduction in curriculum and professional development, and we would restore some of the funding in textbooks. So you could see how we would move back from the prioritized cuts that we had made in our recommended scenario. So again, the recommended proposal that we're putting in front of the Board of Education tonight includes $500,000 in reductions to our operating budget. Again, we've looked at operational costs, we've looked at co-curricular costs, technology, textbooks, curriculum development, and the reading teacher at Cider Mill, and then the $250,000 in participation fees from our athletic program. The one piece that I failed to say that I need to emphasize now is that if we look again at the $400,000 revenue alternative, it's our recommendation that you maintain the $250,000 level in athletics, but then we would look at $150,000 of revenue enhancement through our club and activity program. So the $400,000 scenario does include a participation fee structure in clubs, activities, and athletics. And our thought would be that we would generate $250 from athletics and $150 from our club activity program.
At what level would the fee be imposed on the clubs and activities, and what would it be?
The current thinking on the fee structure in that $400,000 category, where we would look at generating a total revenue stream of $150,000. Our preliminary thinking was at the grades 3 through 8 level, we were looking at approximately a $50 fee, which would be imposed to participate in a club. It would be a one-time fee. It would cover participation in one club or intramural program. And that number was based primarily on the cost to run those programs, based on the number of students who participate. At the high school level, we were looking more at a $100 fee. It's important to note that our athletic program in our operating budget is over $1 million. Our club and activity program in grades 3 through 12, if you look at the math of that, it's more in the neighborhood of, I want to say, $200,000. $300,000. Between $200,000 and $300,000. So just see the relative cost structure of our club activity funding versus our athletic program. So we tried to be somewhat proportional about that.
Okay, before we get into questions, I want you to finish, and then we'll
right.
move on.
Well, my final comment would be to say that I alluded to this earlier, that the extent to which a participation fee structure, I think, the board in its deliberations this evening would have to obviously consider that as a philosophical decision, would perhaps need to consider this as a total aggregate dollar amount. I think we would have time through a deliberative process of looking more strategically about and hearing from the board's advice on how to impose those fees. But you've heard what our recommendation is in our recommended scenario. Again, a $250,000 participation fee, our total aggregate number. And again, our thinking at this point would be that would be a $200 fee per student per sport. And then the surcharge on hockey, which would be a fee of $500 per participant. So, closure comment, I don't want in any way, in terms of my commentary, for anyone to think in this room or in our audience at home that this has been an easy process. This has been a very challenging endurance test in terms of our senior leadership team and its deliberations to provide the board with a recommendation on how best to approach what is a significant reduction in our budget. Just want to say, just in terms of my sitting in front of the board here as a representative of our administrative team, that this is a serious and significant challenge that the Wilton Public Schools faces in terms of responding to this significant cut in our budget.
Thank you. Before we get into questions, we have one housekeeping piece that was part of the Board of Finance's edict to us, which is our capital non-recurring site work. They have told us that they are willing to fund that through funds that they control in the general fund at the town, with the understanding that if they make those funds available, I believe it's about $360,000, that we would agree to that and apply those funds to those capital non-recurring site work activities. So I want to open it up to question discussion on that. Hopefully get concurrence on that and get that off the table before we dive into everybody else's questions. Does everybody have...
That's $360,000?
$350.
$350 is the number? Okay. And that covers everything that we had in the budget for this year, plus the math storage for next year, is that correct?
No, we have $360,000 in the budget for this year, so it basically covers everything for this year.
Well, then that takes us to 1.1 million.
Yeah, it does.
I thought it was just 1 million, but okay.
Yep. Yep. Questions, thoughts, comments? Can we have a motion to direct the Board of Finance to move forward in that manner?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Wonderful. I know in speaking with each of you, my email and phone has been lit up since the Board of Finance finished their deliberations last week, and to the member of the public that asked, why is this happening, and why is it happening this fast? It's happening because of the town charter and what we have to do with our budget, and the fact that the Board of Finance made this decision last week. So we're not hiding it. It's been on our website. It's been televised. There's nothing else that I can think of that we could have possibly done to give you any more information prior to being here. But I would like to go around the table with rounds of questions. I want to try to keep it as structured as we can because we have so many. Let's start with participation fee questions. And let's start on the left.
I think you alluded to this, but I just want to kind of clarify this, that should there be a decision to go forward with some sort of participation fee, is it necessary for us this evening to say how that will be implemented versus just would it be enough for the town to just earmark a dollar amount to be determined how that money will be raised later? Because my concern here is I hear the public, and I'd like to get input from them as to how to do it and that sort of thing.
I could give the board guidance. At the end of the day, the board will have to make that decision in a timely fashion. I do think that, and again, this is just my view, and it's up to the board to determine whether you share my perspective, but we've talked about this as a leadership team. I think it's very important that going into the town meeting and the vote on our budget that our taxpayers have a very clear idea of exactly how we would implement the participation fee structure. So I think the window, and assuming that the board would agree to a aggregate sum total of revenue in its session tonight, we could, based on feedback from the community, look closely at how we raise that money through a participation fee structure, which I think the board would have to review in its April, I guess it would be the meeting on the 25th. I think at that point you would have to be very clear in anticipation of the town meeting what that fee structure would look like.
So we could conceivably pick the number tonight and then go through the specifics.
Right.
Ken talked to Sandy Denny's about the town just needs a number.
They need a number.
Well, they've already given us that.
They've already given it.
So we would have time to put it out there that we're going to hold a public hearing the Board of Ed is going to host a public hearing on this subject, and...
Could be part of our meeting.
Oh, it could be part of our meeting.
The
Okay,
April
I see what you're
25th
saying.
meeting.
I would guess we probably need to hold that at Middlebrook. This room might not hold that number of people.
Yeah.
Sure.
Good point. I guarantee it won't be.
Oh, okay, but it would be a normal Board of Ed meeting. Okay, I see what you're saying. Right.
We did put in front of the board tonight a recommendation on
Right.
how to generate that revenue
Right.
as part of our recommended number of $250,000, primarily so the board could gain awareness of the magnitude of a fee, of the imposition of a fee to generate that kind of money. And again, if you looked at a simple fee structure in our athletic program, you're talking about a $200 fee per sport, per athlete, plus the hockey surcharge, ice hockey surcharge of $500 per student. That's one fee structure that generates $250,000 in revenue. So you just get an idea of what that looks like. But we could, I think we have a 2-week window if the board determines that the citizenry has a right to know how exactly that fee structure would look like prior to the town meeting.
Karen?
I don't have any questions.
Go.
The $50 for the 3 through 8, is that per activity? Or is
No,
that
per
one-time
student.
fee?
One-time activity fee.
And how much would that raise?
It raises approximately $150,000.
No, the 3 through 8.
3 through about
12.
$75,000.
But the
3 through 8
8
raises about
component.
$75,000.
So it's half.
Okay. Laura? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sort of on the same topic, but have we looked into being able to get the game receipts going into the athletic fund instead
We're
of...
the only town that doesn't get
Yes.
gate receipts.
That's something that the town budgets for, so I think it's very unlikely that they would give them to us if we asked. It's really very little.
20,000?
At the most.
Anything else?
There'll be more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Laura?
In terms of the co-curricular, 300,000, I should know this, but how much of that is from the high school? It's 300,000 for 3 through 12.
About two-thirds of it.
2/3 of it from the high school. And was the $200 amount chosen just to come up to the 250,000 mark?
It's our...
Yes, okay.
Yes, but at the same time, it is part of our recommendation.
Okay.
Anything else?
And the hockey was a third, just taking a third, having the players come up with a third of the rental cost.
Roughly, yes.
Chris?
Did you consider a percentage formula rather than just a $200 per athlete, given that track is much less expensive?
The variables
Correct.
involved in a fee structure for pay-to-play or pay-to-participate in interscholastic athletic programs, we've put in front of the board a rather straightforward structure similar to what Litchfield uses currently. There are other considerations or variables that you could look at. One would be a family cap as a scenario in terms of revenue enhancement and how you look at your fee structure so that you would cap the amount of money a family would have to pay depending on the number of students, athletes involved, their children, and the number of sports they play. So you have that aspect. You also have a tiered structure that you could look at where you look at the actual cost to run the program based on the total operating expense divided simply by the number of student participants. You have that kind of tiered structure, which I think responds directly to your question of how that would look. And of course, then you also have to look closely at providing relief to families based on some threshold about their affordability to pay the fee. I will say that the question around equity is very important, and the leadership team has talked at length about it. It's very difficult to... it's a very simplistic argument to look at the cost of an athletic program and the operating budget divided by the number of participants. it can be done in its simplest form. But you also have to be careful about other factors involved in operating a particular program, including the cost of town facilities, for example. The field house and its maintenance, other athletic fields and such. There's ancillary costs associated with running programs that make it a bit complex. But in its simplest form, you could look at a tiered structure where you look at the total cost of a program divided by the number of participants, and you could develop a pay structure that's based on that aspect. So there are a variety of ways to get to which I think you're putting forward as equity issues in terms of the fee structure.
And we did discuss that, like Tim said, at length. And one consequence of doing something like that, and we were, as we looked at some of the models we were looking at and the price points, $200 is a lot of money for some people. And if you do a sliding scale and a lot of people are paying less, a lot of people are going to be paying more if you're looking to get the same amount of revenue. So it's really, a tough call if you want to go into something like that. And if you made it too big of a sliding scale, it would probably become quite onerous to manage. For example, if you ended up with 35 different fees for 35 different sports, and the athletic secretary has to keep track of all that.
Did you consider an across-the-board percentage cut?
In terms of program?
Instead of a per athlete fee, just
we have
30%, say, from every single sport.
We discussed at length what has been a conversation in the past, actually when I was high school principal, when we were living through those difficult times, of the amount of savings that would be generated by cutting our freshman program. That's where most of the conversation was, in terms of how to reduce, if that's the intent of the question, how would we reduce the athletic budget, short of a revenue enhancement?
No, that wasn't, my question was...
It's a $1.1 million budget, cut it by 30%.
Yeah.
Well,
so
cut it by
everybody
$400,000.
gets an equitable percentage cut. Not the freshman. Freshman football will be cut 30%. Varsity football will be cut 30%. Varsity soccer will be cut 30%. Freshman soccer.
I don't know that you could cut varsity football. I think if you cut football 30%, you would probably cut out...
Well, the football program then, okay.
You'd cut out, freshman football.
And whoever they chose
and if you have, I don't know how you cut out, if you cut out 30% of the track team, you'd have to have 30% fewer athletes participating. If you want to reduce the coaches...
fall to the program to determine how to make up the 30%.
Well, the analysis, I think, and the question is quite legitimate and thought-provoking. And as a leadership team, we've talked at length about it. How would you reduce your athletic program by a proportional way that would be fair and equitable and would, at the same time, allow us to live the mission statement of our interscholastic athletic program and its core beliefs? And that has always landed in the same place, that we would reduce and cut freshman athletics and give freshmen an opportunity to make JV teams. That's where it's landed, in terms of a reflective exercise around equity and fairness across all of our programs.
That would be about $110,000.
Yeah.
About $110,000, which, in speaking to the issue of percentage, that gets you to about 15%.
Right. How many are in freshman athletics?
I don't have that number. I know the general participation rate in athletics is approximately 60 to 65% of our student body.
Yeah. Okay, then I just have to ask the question: Have you looked at ice hockey? I mean, there's $152,000 that's sitting there. It serves 65 people. I don't see any. It's skyrocketing because of ice time, and I think that is absolutely going to continue. And I just don't see, to me, that we've reduced programs, we've gotten rid of the mentor program, we've gotten rid of the enrichment program, we've cut co-curricular. You said it yourself, athletics has not taken any type of reduction really over the last few years. They have successfully navigated the last few years while we've cut others, and I just think that we have to look at cutting programs, and to me that fits, I hate to say it, very nicely, and it's regrettable, but I think we do have to think about it.
If the board were to recommend to the administration that we look at our athletic program with a prioritized recommendation around reductions, we would engage that exercise and we would share with the board our recommendation about how we would get to a certain dollar amount.
Hockey is in the budget this year for $103,231.
If the board were to give us guidance...
It's $151.99.
And football is more expensive than boys hockey.
I don't mean to... I'm not trying to avoid the question. What I'm suggesting, though, is that the board were to give us guidance as a leadership team to reduce our athletic budget, then we would engage a thoughtful exercise to let you know how we would accomplish that outcome. I can only share with you at this point our recommendation that we've given the board alternatives to generate revenue from 0 to $400,000. We've given you how we would go about reduce our operating budget, and we have not included any recommendation to reduce any of our athletic programs beyond operational expenses. So it is a fair comment and recommendation that in lieu of a participation fee, that we would look carefully at reducing and making reductions in our athletic program in total at a certain rate.
I would like to make that recommendation because I think as a public school, we don't have the obligation to provide every sport. I mean, look at equestrians, rowers, sailors, dancers. They all participate and compete in their sports outside of the school setting. So I do think that, and there are opportunities for many of these other sports for these athletes to participate in a setting outside of the school.
Well, I think it's a fair...
I would like to see what your recommendation is before I make a decision on participation.
It was a fair comment. There's only one aspect around this issue that I would like for the board to consider. In many cases, a student's participation in an interscholastic athletic program is the one thing, and I may be exaggerating at some level, but it could be the one thing in that student's life that's connecting them to this high school in a way that's generating an opportunity to realize all the goals that are indeed found in our mission statement in our interscholastic athletic program and in our core beliefs. I'm not going to go into that in detail now, but clearly, if the board gives us guidance to do so, we will do that. But in representing the administration, I think there would be great concern about reducing any of our athletic programs, freshmen or otherwise, in terms of what is currently staffed. But we'd be happy to come up with that list if that's the guidance.
Yeah, I have to say, I agree with Tim's take on that. We're in a difficult position, but to make a decision that eliminates a child's ability to do something versus creates a hurdle for them to do something, to me is two very different things. I understand the challenges of a participation fee, but that's a challenge that can perhaps be overcome much more easily than there is no team.
However, if you were to eliminate the swimming teams, they have the option of swimming for the local Waiwahoos. I mean, there are other venues where people who have the interest in a sport can participate. It doesn't have to be for the school. And that might be one of the considerations that the administrative team would look at.
Well, that's swimming, and that's fine because that's across the street. But what about the kids who play hockey? I don't know, but
I don't know if there's another venue for that,
Yeah.
but there are leagues for a lot of different sports.
Yeah, the one anecdotal story I think of is the girls' varsity goalie last year who ended up going to, I believe it was Annapolis, and the hockey team was a big part of what she did. It meant a lot to her, and to take that. And I know another girl who was, I'll say, second, third string, but the camaraderie that she had, that was the only sport she played, the only sport. And to take that away from a child is just, it's heartbreaking to think about that versus giving them an opportunity for a participation fee.
But $200 is not
hurdle. It's a huge amount of money. And if you're talking per sport, you have more than one child in high school, that's not a small amount. To some people, maybe. But there are families in this town who would have to say, okay, you know what, you can't do marching band this year because you want to play soccer and lacrosse.
Fair point. But
And that's a choice. It's not
Right.
that they're like going to become homeless because of that. But I just think it's a public school, and we're providing these opportunities. We should be providing them to everyone.
One of the other considerations that came to mind, if I may, has been a result of your deliberations as we speak, and that is you're providing us with multiple criteria to look at if we were to reduce our athletic program. One strategy is to look at high-cost programs and the amount of students that participate. So you can imagine the complexity of making that decision. Another consideration would be just low, undersubscribed programs and making that determination. Another consideration would be those programs that provide community opportunities for participation. So you can see the complexity of what criteria you establish. I want the board to be clear about that, that as a leadership team, you have to look at a set of criteria that generates the reduction that's equitable and fair, and I think you then have to clearly articulate to the community how you prioritize those reductions based on whatever criteria you're looking at. Are you looking at high cost? Are you looking at low participation? Are you looking at opportunity in the same sport outside of the high school program? So you're getting to the complexities of the decision in your deliberations.
And, to that point, I think it is such a complex decision to be laid out. That's why I think, personally, I think the first hurdle for this board is whether or not we do it. And then once that's decided, then what's the dollar amount earmark for it? And then I think all of these discussions of where and how and who and what needs to continue, even if that means through the summer, to prepare for the next year. Because I just don't think it's something that's going to be resolved
It's not going to be
quickly.
unanimous.
When you
no
say,
matter how
when
good-
can you just clarify, when
Yes,
you say
go ahead.
if, do you mean participation fees or reducing athletics?
Well, I'm not in support of reducing the athletics at all. So that's my position on that, because I don't think, I see a huge value in our freshman athletics. They are the feeder to the other teams, and I don't think that there's enough opportunities available to freshmen on JV and varsity teams. It already exists that they will take a freshman if that person's a top-notch athlete. So that opportunity is already there, and it just doesn't happen that much. The freshman sports is a very critical sport, and I'm not in favor of cutting any sports whatsoever.
I also remember how important it was for the 8th graders coming in to have the sport.
It really connected them quickly.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, it was a nice way to connect to the school.
Well, I think the community was pretty clear. A couple of years ago, we looked at freshman sports, and you may remember it was the most well-attended superintendent's public hearing.
Yes, it
But
was.
an event which I know was high on everybody's list of things to attend. But that year, the consistent message from the community was, rather than cut, to Lori's point, I think, rather than cut sports, we'd rather pay the fee. We're already paying it on the rationale, and some of you have said it. Many of us are paying it, rec programs up to through 8th grade. So it's not a new development. But I think that was a very clear message. And I suspect what you would hear from the community about if you were wrestling with whether to have fees or not have fees, to your suggestion. I think that is a threshold question.
Right.
For us this evening, in order to move this discussion along, it does make sense to carve out the vote on whether or not we can agree to participation fees. Let's all agree collectively up front. We passed a good budget. We passed a thoughtful budget. We passed a budget that did not include participation fees. We're not here because we want to be here. We're here because we have to be here. And in order to come up with the $750,000, we've got a number of alternatives, one of which is no participation fees, and one of which includes participation fees. If we go without participation fees, we've got an alternative in front of us that that's pretty ugly. Based on that, and based on the fact that we all probably collectively agree we don't like participation fees, can we move forward and at least accept that we have to have them and agree to that, and then move forth from there? Does that make sense?
Well, we'll have to have a vote to see.
Should we all just
Right.
comment first and then vote? Because I don't know where my fellow board members are necessarily on that topic. So
we
to
can,
just
we
take
can
it
do
to
that if you'd like. Sure. You want to start?
I think, as most people philosophically, absolutely 1,000% opposed to participation fees. I think in a public school system, it's just part of the education. But reality hits me hard, and if it means cutting things, I would rather pay than have very valuable programs cut. So if my hands are tied, then I would support moving forward with a participation fee, although I would want it to be not exclusive to just athletics. I would want it to be more inclusive of anything that's beyond the academic classroom would be potentially eligible. And that would be my position, I guess.
Thank you. Karen?
I'm opposed to the participation fees. I think that it really opens the door to a privatization of public education. And I ask, what's next? We're going to charge to ride the bus. But I think, most importantly, if we impose participation fees, what we have done is we've let the Board of Finance make policy for the Board of Education, and the balance of power between the Board of Education and the Board of Finance is going to swing in favor of the Board of Finance for the foreseeable future.
I see participation fees as being divisive in the student level, at the parent level, at the community level. We've heard tonight an individual that came up and spoke already saying that the fees for hockey are too high. I think that if more parents had been aware that this was happening, as we've said, there would be a very large group of individuals here tonight. I think we're going to turn our coaches into tax collectors. I think the parents, as has been reported in the study, there'll be an argument as to, well, I want to pay less a fee because my son or daughter isn't playing. I don't see that as being beneficial for the community or the academic environment, and I will oppose participation fees.
Thank you. Laura?
It's really difficult when you're weighing, like, do we do participation fees? Are we talking about a science teacher or a reading specialist? But again, it comes down to we have to make drastic cuts. I think we should make the drastic cuts, but when it comes for participation fees, I think it's a slippery slope. I agree with almost everything Karen said. And then what's next? If we do co-curriculars, then, and we're only talking about academic classes, well, then there goes music and art and technology education. And, are we going to start, charging for science if you want to participate in science lab? And I think that it's a public school, and we need to provide opportunities and really consider that. And so I am against participation fees.
Chris?
I think Tim's initial point is very well taken, that the driving factor going into these cuts was to stay away from the classroom. We haven't even gotten into some of the academic area cuts that the administration has painstakingly, I'm sure, proposed. The reading teacher, et cetera, which I have a lot of concerns about those. So, and that's with them very, very begrudgingly coming up with $250,000 in participation fees. So that said, I think we're not going to have a choice but to go this route. Nobody likes it. We did the DIRG study last fall. It's definitely a trend in Connecticut. It's a trend in our DIRG. The Board of Finance pulled $400,000 out of the air. I don't know where they came. The next closest district in our DIRG is Ridgefield, which collects $326,000, and $41,000 of those are gate receipts. And now suddenly we're supposed to come up with $400,000, to ask our parents for $400,000. We can't do that, but we have to do something. My concern is that we make it as equitable as possible, and we're throwing around, well, we can't do this, we can't do that, but we have to find a way to be fair about it. We have to find a way to make sure that no child is denied an opportunity to be on sport because his parents can't afford it, or because, to Laura's point, they have to make choices. Well, you can't be in the band and on the soccer team. I mean, we're better than that. But having said that, it's an awful problem we have, and academics have to come first. So if we have to ask parents to pay a little bit more for participation fees, I think we have to do that.
Thank you. I'm sure I'm going to get quoted on this, but I think the Board of Finance's choice of $400,000 was ludicrous and arbitrary. I don't believe they actually looked at our Durgay participation fee study. I don't think they sought any public input on that number, and I don't think they took enough time to look at our budget to understand how thin and thoughtfully put together it already was. I also believe that any cuts that we make to our school budget are cuts that are too deep at this point. Mm-hmm. Yet we still are faced with $750,000 that we have to agree to tonight. With that, I am against participation fees for the same reasons that all of you are, but I am in favor of implementing a $400,000 participation fee program. And I believe that we ought to measure the success of that program over the next year. We ought to look at participation levels last year compared to next year and report back on that to the town. I agree that a flat fee structure is not necessarily fair, but rather we should be looking at the fee relative to the cost of the program and the number of people participating in it. I have a very difficult time thinking of a runner who participates in cross country, participates in indoor track, and participates in spring track, and is asked to pay $600 and yet gets a tank top. That to me does not sit well. Mm-hmm. We have to vote on it, and the reality is if we do not approve participation fees, we are going to cut into the classroom, and that sickens me. So I ask each of you to consider voting for the classroom and do so with stringent disagreement with how we're put in this position. But I don't see how we can move forward without doing so. And Karen, I get your point about the Board of Finance putting their fingers in our business, and I think we need to make it very clear to the town that what they've done is completely inappropriate, and we do not feel that they have done the town or any citizen in it any justice. What they've done is egregious. With that, I'd like a motion to approve participation fees.
So moved.
I'll second it. All in favor? All opposed? We have a problem because I envision that we're not going to get to an agreement on how we hit our budget tonight. And based on town bylaws, if we can't come to an agreement tonight, we pull in the first selectman to help us break this. So, do we want to discuss this further? Do we want to go to that level?
Perhaps it would be better to, at this point, having kind of seen where people are, discuss the other reduction issues and other possibilities, because perhaps there's some things out there that are not part of these recommendations. I think all of us have kind of talked about.
I'm okay with that.
That maybe to go there and then revisit this issue.
But did
Right.
we want to ask the administration to review athletics in general, or is that now off the table?
I'm not opposed to them providing information. I think the more information, the better for anything.
Do we need a motion to request the administration to do that?
The challenge that I have in doing that is we're out of time.
You know, the one other thing I want to add is, and again, this is going back to the Board of Finance. The way it was phrased at that meeting was that this is something we can do, and we've been hiding, you know, it's always been, they've always known they had this over us, that they could always get the board of it. So long as we didn't do participation fees, they knew that they could cut our budget, because we could always resort to that. So as long as we don't do that, they'll always know, well, we can keep cutting until we sort of drive them to do it. The way that it was phrased at the meeting last week, it was unanimous, and it was just a given.
Yeah.
Maybe the Board of Finance will change.
I'm sorry?
Yeah,
Say the numbers may change.
Chris makes a good point, though.
Yeah, but
you know, if we're able to do what they're asking us to do without participation fees, they're always going to think that we can cut deeper.
because they didn't resort to it this year, so we'll get it next year.
But then what's the stopping from, so we do it this year and saying, okay, look, great, we raised $250,000 from high school students, let's, you know.
Well, then we'll have the pushback.
Well, that's where I think the actual participation levels speak back to the town on that.
Which is
And Dr. Richards brought up an interesting point. If we implement a $400,000 participation fee program based on a well-thought-out, balanced program that tries to evenly and fairly distribute the costs, and half the kids don't show up, to your point, then we miss our revenue target.
Mm-hmm.
We're off our budget at the end of the year. We have no choice but to take it out of the excess cost grant. And we have clear, measurable data to deliver back to the town that that was an insane number.
I think it may take more than a year. I think for first year, you know, for 1 year maybe parents were like, okay, you know, I think it would need to be. I don't know if there'll be enough. If there is, you know, I don't know.
That's a fair point. Don't know.
Yeah, and in the meantime, like you said, but who suffers in the meantime? You know,
well, it also
the 2-3 years where you're doing this, there are kids who are not participating, so you've already lost some kids.
And we're talking about mental health, and we're talking about, you know, we can be doing a lot to help our students learn and grow to love school through the grade school, but I think we all around this table know that teenagers are a different beast. And they have different, and that's why high school is structured differently than middle grade school.
Yeah.
Right.
And they have different needs and different requirements for their education. And, you know...
I spoke to two varsity coaches, past and present, about the concept of participation fees, and also about the concept of would it make sense if we have to do this to try to pass some of this overall cost onto the boosters. And their take was surprising to me, which was, we're expecting participation fees to come, and that's fine. And if there is a child that can't afford it or has difficulty, that's an appropriate opportunity to work with a booster program to cover that cost. They did not see or feel some of the pain that we're expressing here. I was very surprised at that.
Well, that does run counter to the meeting we had last year, I believe, or maybe it was the year before, where we had the boosters and the athletic director up in front of us, and he asked that exact question.
Right. And mind you, it was two individuals. So.
Yeah, and their response was that it would definitely damage their ability to fund their operations by having the parents pay into that and then pay the participation fee.
It would hurt the booster clubs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, if in order to try to move this along, let's have a conversation about other places that we might recommend to the district look at if participation fees aren't on the table. And
well, let me just raise one, because I'm sure Ken's already thought about it, but the actuaries and the funding formula for OPEB, has that been included in the $580,000 $89,000 number.
That's the
for
number
OPEB?
the actuary provides us. And it's based on, much like the pension obligation, it's based on the June 30th, 2012 balance and liability.
Okay, and does that change is that based on the changes to the formula that we agreed to last year?
I believe it, yeah.
I think this is going to be a long night, so if my family's watching, go ahead and eat dinner.
Actually, I'm going to wait for you.
Karen's neighbors, you should go over and turn her dinner off. With that, let's go around the table and see if there's any other budget cut places we might suggest the district consider. Let's start on the right this time.
I'm still, again, staying away from the classrooms. I would like to look into not replacing the 2 administrative positions that are currently open.
That would be the vice principal at the high school and
the vice principal at high school and the assistant superintendent position.
Superintendent.
Again, not eliminate the position, freeze them. I'm wondering if there are any efficiencies to be found. You mentioned that you know of 5 teachers so far who are retiring. Do we have any support staff who have indicated that they won't be returning, won't be leaving?
There have been a couple, but the only place you really see a substantial savings is with teachers, because there's such a large spread between entry-level salary and retirement salary. You don't have that with any of the other
Even when
groups.
you factor in benefits and things?
No.
But does that...
The benefits are the same for everybody, basically.
Does that open up the possibility, though, of merging positions?
Yeah.
Combining functions?
I suppose it would in some cases. We have to look at them individually. Don't forget, in our initial budget proposal, we are eliminating 1 clerical position at Miller Driscoll that is vacant.
I was also wondering, I hate to even say this, but the anonymous gift that we got for pre-K, is there any way that can be used to offset some of the pre-K technology costs? Or is that the nature of the gift? That
No, the gift had to be on top of what we're already obligated to do.
I feel awful saying it's somebody's birthday present.
If I may.
Please.
In identifying opportunities for further reduction, it's apparent to me that the board is asking for feedback. That happened with the OPEB, further retirements, and the anonymous gifts. Are you inviting feedback on the administrator?
You're sure?
I think that the issue around reduction may not be the right word, because I heard you say hiring freeze in the 2 vacant positions.
Yeah.
Which is the assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction and the assistant principalship at the high school. I think that it's interesting, from my perspective, that in all of the deliberations up until this point, there's been no conversation about reductions to our administrative team staffing. Certainly, I think the board would be quite mindful of the impact of school and district operations if both of these positions were left vacant. Our administrators are, as you know, in my view, working at full capacity across the district to focus on instructional leadership, working on student scheduling, supervision, and disciplinary matters. The all-important conversations around supervision and evaluation. And in fact, we're looking, as Jane Anderson has talked about, a new evaluation plan that's going to put tremendous obligation on our administrators to not only supervise our non-tenured teachers, but all of our tenured teachers under the plan, requiring observations of all those teachers. The special education responsibilities that take place. The idea that at the high school you would have 2 assistant principals overseeing our special education caseload and 504 caseloads, I think would be problematic. the work that we do in overseeing and supervising club and activity programs, on parent and community relations, on crisis management. As I'm sure the board recognizes, there are times at each of our buildings where the entire administrative team can go offline for multiple days dealing with one student issue. The idea of the work that we do to manage our facilities, to oversee emergency operations, to oversee strategic planning. And in terms of the work of this office, the extent to which this position was left vacant in our district's history for a period of years. And I think there has been somewhat unanimous deliberation around that and conclusions around that, that it created a structure where we lost systemic and strategic planning K-12 across the district. Our curriculum and instruction evolved in a way where buildings were operating independent of each other. The work of the support of the educational philosophy, goals, and objectives of our program. Again, I'll allude to the coordination and articulation of the K-12 curriculum program. The evaluation of new programs that are being implemented, the Math and Focus program, the K-5 Literacy Initiative, the STEM initiative, the full-day kindergarten program. Absent this position, to have that fall entirely on our building principals, I think is something the board needs to think about. Supporting technology integration and assessment, implementing the strategic plan, the efforts to support the superintendent as his designee in many of the deliberations that impact our school district. I think you would find it not surprising that I would stand and try to elicit the board's support not to consider that option around a reduction in administrators here across our team. If indeed we were asked to consider a reduction in our ranks, I think the board would appreciate the opportunity for us to deliberate as a leadership team about where best to accomplish that outcome. I do think the board needs to be reflective about a determination that a prioritized reduction in our administrative team would come from the assistant superintendency and from the assistant principalship at the high school. If we were put into a position where we had to strategically reduce the administrators in our district, we would have to deliberate as a team of how best to accomplish that. So just giving you feedback about this proposal or the possibility of a reduction in that area. And again, I'm sure the board isn't surprised that we would try to educate the board about how a reduction in our administrator ranks would be, I think, a difficult cut to absorb.
I think one of the, I'm sorry, Tim. I think one of the issues